The Thorn of Midnight. Chapter 1. The city that sleeps with one eye open. I first saw him on the river bridge, as the bells shivered midnight into the bones of the city. The river Morrow is not beautiful at night. It is a bandage of tarnished silver over a wound of stone. The old arching bridge clutches the two banks together like a bruised handshake, and in the middle, where the balustrade is broken in two places, the wind passes through like a warning, tasting of iron and tide. I had no business there, except that insomnia prefers places it can haunt, and I prefer to be fair and give it somewhere scenic to do its work. My apartment was 3 blocks away, a 6th-floor walk-up above a bakery that only slept between 3 and 5 a.m. During those hours, the ovens were quiet, the street was quiet, the walls were quiet, and my mind refused to be. At the library where I worked, the evening shift, a neo-Gothic cathedral of mildewed archives and holy silence, my co-workers said I looked like a girl who had forgotten how to blink. They said it kindly, which made it worse. So I walked the river's shameful loop, past the shuttered cinemas and the cold dark windows, past the alley where someone had scrawled in chalk, "Wake me when the saints return," and I crossed the bridge. That was where I saw him. He wasn't leaning against the railing, as men do when they want to be admired. He wasn't smoking or looking tragic or talking on the phone to someone who would not pick up. He stood as if the bridge had been built to bear him, and the river was an irrelevant rumor beneath his feet. He wore a black coat that made the night look like a pale imitation of itself. His hair was dark, though not as dark as the coat, and the wind did nothing to it. His face would have been handsome even if it had been stern, but it was not merely stern, it was considering. He was looking at the river with the same expression I had seen men use when reading a contract for the second time, as if hoping the clauses would admit they were lying. I should have gone past him, as one does in this city, eyes politely unfocused, footsteps that confess nothing. But his gaze caught at me the way a thorn catches at silk, not enough to wound, only enough to announce that what you are wearing is fragile. "Don't," he said. It was soft. The wind nearly unstitched the word. "Don't what?" I asked, stopping with one hand on the battered rail. His eyes came to me. They were a gray eye associated with the hours before a storm, the ones in which every window knows which pane will break. He nodded to the slashed gap where 2 balusters were missing, their marble bellies shattered long ago by an accident no one bothered to repair. The river swelled sullenly beneath. "Don't look down," he said. "There are truths that are only brave if we keep them in the corner of our vision." I looked, because that is who I am. The river was black glass. My reflection was an accusation, a woman whose eyes were too wide and too tired and too curious. In her hair the wind had braided a few defiant strands. In her mouth the word "why" was a prayer I had not written. "You see," he said, "I see a river and a fall that begins before you touch the water," he said, and the certainty of his voice made me shiver. "This city breeds a certain kind of gravity." "Are you in the business of warning strangers?" I asked. "I'm in the business of understanding them," he replied. "When the city lets me." "And does the city let you often?" "Not often enough," he said, and considered me again. "You work at the Morrow Public, in the South Wing." The part of me that disapproved of men who memorize women flared. "Have you been following me?" "I've been reading you," he said. "The way one reads a street, the way one reads a loaded silence. Entos. That is a very poetic way of saying a very impolite thing." He smiled, and it made his sternness look like a decision rather than a nature. "Then let me be impolite. You walk with your fingers in your coat pocket as if you're touching a key, but the cut of your coat says you aren't a person anyone has given a key to lately. You keep your head tilted when the wind rises, listening for trains perhaps, though the tracks no longer run at night. Library employees who take the late shift have the quiet look of people who prefer the dead, but you don't. You prefer the living. You're listening for them, for a particular one of them. A flush climbed my throat. I almost wished he had said he'd followed me. That is absurd. Absurder than a woman walking a bridge at midnight, hoping that if she gets close enough to the river's edge, the city will show her its conscience. You don't even know me. I know your name, he said, and the sound of it on his tongue felt like a verdict. Elara. I almost said no. I almost made up a name to punish his arrogance, but there are lies that don't stick because the world has rehearsed the truth too well. How? I made it my business to know the names of all the caretakers of the South Wing, he said. I donated a collection, old letters, the sort that smell like a wine stain that learned to read. We received a set 2 weeks ago, I admitted, curiosity tipping forward like a child on a too-high chair. You didn't sign the donor file. I prefer my quiet to be purchased, not given. Did you read them? We're still cataloging. He said, which suggested he expected me to lie about whether I'd peeked. I had read 3, none in order, all dated between 1870 and 1873, all written by the same hand to the same person, all haunted by a man whose name had been redacted by a prudish archivist, replaced by a polite little rectangle of black. Mister, does the hand remind you of anyone? He asked. Handwriting is a portrait of posture, not of faces, but his own. And you dodge very well, he said. If the world were kinder, it would admire you for it. And you? I challenged. Are you the world? I am what the world is when it wants something. Which is? He watched the river. Which is dangerous. We stood together in a silence that felt like a stranger inspecting the furniture of an empty house. The city went about its sleep. The streetcar clanged 2 neighborhoods away. A stray dog barked at a dream. Somewhere a tenor drunk on heartbreak practiced the same line again and again. I am not forgiven. I am not forgiven. Tell me, he said after a time, do you believe in curses and tenors? I laughed, because you should laugh at a man like that on a night like this. I believe in poor decisions that we elevate to myth when we don't want to admit to them. Then perhaps you'd be interested in a poor decision, he said. A wealthy one, poorly made. What are you selling? Nothing. Not to you. And yet you ask me about curses. I tilted my head back, the wind nosing under my hair like an insistent cat. Is this a test? It's a door, he said, and when I looked, his gaze had the shape of a key. And you are the only person in this city who knows how to open it without breaking the wood. You confuse me with a locksmith, I said, but my mouth had gone dry. What's behind the door? A story. I work in a library. I'm drowning in stories. Not this one. Why me? He gave a tiny shrug, elegant as a glove turned over. Because you look at the river when I tell you not to. Because you are careful with old injuries. Because you read the letters and you smelled the wine. Because you live on the 6th floor, and people on the 6th floor have not yet learned to be afraid of falling. 6 floors are a middle child's compromise between ambition and caution. He was right. I didn't like him for it. What do you want? I said at last. Be literal. I want you to accept a job. I already have one. I am aware you will keep it. I admire people who keep the moon and want the sun too. What does the job pay? More than you will trust, he said, but that's an acceptable cost to me. What is the work? He looked past me, to the city with its wounded windows and hunched chimneys and soft alleys where the hungry make the most beautiful vows. I have a house, he said. It is old enough to be superstitious. Something in it has begun to repeat itself. The servants are practical people. They do not like repetition that is not required by recipe or floor polish. The house needs a librarian. The house needs a priest, I said. Priests ask forgiveness. Librarians ask questions. He wanted, see, and what does the house need forgiveness for? That is one of the questions, he replied. Will you come? I considered the river. I considered my 6th-floor apartment and the bakery's cinnamon breath and the quiet like a bruise around my chest at 3 a.m. I considered the letters. Those polite, ardent ghosts. What is your name? I asked. Cassian, he said. Cassian Vale. The city knows the names of its wolves. Vale was one of them. Real estate like a map-maker's fantasy. A glass tower at the harbor that changed color depending on the mood of the weather. A history of lawsuits that made judges look as if they'd bitten olives with the pit still in. Rumors about the way he shook hands, the way a gambler touches his last coin. I didn't move because danger doesn't always look like an alley. Sometimes it looks like a patron. I folded my hands around the railing. It was cold. I will come, I said, on the condition that I may leave at any time. You may always leave, he said, and though his voice was soft, I didn't mistake it for a kindness. The house sat at the western edge of the city, where the river tired of being heroic and lay down to be a lake. Maps called the neighborhood Dorian Heights, because the men who drew them had loved novels too much in their childhoods. The women who kept the houses called it the Edge, because the wind rose there like a song that didn't trust words. He sent a car for me the next evening, a black thing with the glossy patience of a panther. The driver was a woman with hair shaved to her scalp and hands that made the steering wheel look grateful to be held. She did not speak except to say my name when I came down. Elara. Do you know me? I asked, sliding into the scent of leather and rain. Mr. Vale told me to memorize your face, she said. I don't forget faces. What's your name? Pating C. Anke, she replied, and did not offer anything else, which I respected. We drove through the city's tired arteries, where the streetlights stuttered and the storefronts believed in daylight with shaky faith. As we crossed west, the pavements widened as if they were rehearsing for guests who never arrived. The houses grew taller, the hedges more disciplined, the windows less interested in what was outside them. The Vale house rose above a sprawl of gardens, like a question too immodest to whisper. It was not the largest house on the edge, it was the oldest, and old houses have the luxury of choosing their ugliness carefully. It wore its steep roof like an eyebrow, its shutters like winks, its ivy like a story that refused to end. There were gargoyles crouched at the corners, too weary to be frightening, and a balcony that had learned to overhear everything. Anke pulled to the circular drive and glanced at me. He's waiting inside. Do you like him? I asked, because sometimes truth arrives in a shape too small to be useful to anyone but a driver. She thought about it. I like the way he watches his servants' hands, she said finally. That is a respectful man. Whether he is a kind man is something else. Inside, the foyer smelled of beeswax and the church. There was a chandelier made of something that had been glass once, and decided to remain so only out of pride. The floors were black and white like a chessboard no one wanted to play. A staircase climbed away with the lazy confidence of old money and good wood. Cassian met me at the base of it, as if he had rehearsed the angle he wished to appear at and had dismissed it as too theatrical. He was in shirt sleeves. The coat had belonged to the night. Here he wore something more human. He looked almost tired. The sight made me feel relieved and unreasonably fond at once, which I resented. "Welcome," he said. "You're punctual." "Books punish the late," I replied. He smiled slightly. "Come, I will show you the library." He did not show me the house first, as hosts do, not the dining room where the silver pretended to mind its manners, not the parlors where chairs practiced being uncomfortable under expensive people. He took me straight down a corridor hung with portraits, the dead wearing their ruin proudly through a door fitted with a lock old enough to have eaten 1,000 keys, and into a room that made the rest of the house lower its eyes. It was beautiful. Even if you dislike the company of books, you must admit the way they assemble themselves into a vision of patience is a kind of beauty. The shelves were dark cherry. The ladder was a ribbon of polished spine. The carpet had forgotten 100 footsteps. The windows were tall and embarrassed by their own height. The air was the soft, stubborn temperature of a room that remembers everyone who has wept in it. "This was my mother's," he said. "She believed in keeping a room's heart where you could hear it. She died when I was 16. "I'm sorry," I said, "because sometimes the most ordinary words are the only ones that behave." "She was a woman with a talent for aftermaths," he said. "When she died, she left behind a certain arrangement of papers, wills, letters, and one book I was forbidden to read." "You kept the book?" "A just through." "And with that, I did," he said, and went to the desk. He unlocked a drawer I am certain had at least 3 ghosts in it, and drew out a volume bound in sober blue cloth, unmarked by title or author. He placed it on the desk, as if he were putting down a sleeping cat who sometimes bit. "And?" I said. "And I read it last month," he said. I had made a ritual of not reading it. Every year on her birthday I would look at it and not open it. You understand rituals? I did. The way you avoid certain streets on anniversaries, the way you choose a table in a cafe because once someone asked you a question at that table, and the question changed how you cleaned your teeth and how you tied your shoes. "What changed?" I asked. "I got tired of not knowing," he said. "It is a hunger too arrogant to feed for long." He opened the book to a place already dog-eared by his betrayal. The pages were filled with spidery writing and the occasional ink blot in the shape of a thought interrupted by a door slamming. He turned it so the text faced me. "Read," he said. I leaned, my fingers nowhere near the margins, because I am a woman with manners. The lines were dates more than a century old, names that tasted of horses and fevers, and the voice of the writer, which was female and certain, not of herself, but of the way the world would harm those who chose otherwise. In the middle of a page, a sentence that hooked itself in the tender place under my ribs. "I have unhooked the moon, and I am wearing it as a brooch, but it burns." "What is this?" I asked, hushed. "My mother's mother's mother," he said, and the lineage felt like an incantation. "Her diary." "You think a diary can curse a house?" "I think my family is very good at invitations they pretend they didn't send," he said, "and that whatever entered when she wrote these words decided to stay for the wine." I turned a few pages, gently. The entries turned from salons and weather and the cost of lace into sick beds and debts and a refrain. "He comes at midnight and takes nothing, and leaves behind absence. The he was capitalized as if it were God or a gentleman for whom God had moved aside. Who is he? I asked. My grandmother believed he was a riverman, he said softly. A ferryman? I said, with a laugh that tried too hard to be brave. This city is very fond of old myths. Old myths are fond of rent, he said. They find the rich and live with them. And what does the riverman want? He held my gaze. He collects promises. Something strange scrolled over my skin. Then you are in luck, I said, forcing wit I didn't own. I do not make many. You will for me. He said it was air-soft and iron-hard, and I had the impulse to step back, though his hands were calmly at his sides. And you will keep them. That is why I chose you. I haven't said yes, I said, though I had already come, which is what yes looks like when it is trying not to be seen. I know, he said. Come, let me show you the thing that repeats. He led me not out into the hallway, but through a narrow door cleverly tucked into the casework. It revealed a staircase that had not decided whether it wanted to be secret. It was dusty without being dirty, the sort of stairs that servants used when they had not yet learned to trust a house with their footsteps. We descended. The temperature altered the way a voice lowers in the presence of a sleeping child. We came into a stone corridor, patched with lime, careful with its echoes. At the end of it, another door, this one newer, with a keypad lock out of place in all that patience. Cassian tapped in a code without bothering to hide it from me, and the door leapt open as if glad to be included in a confidence. The room we entered had the arrangement of a memory kept trying to make itself modern. There were shelves of boxes, each labeled in a painstaking hand. There was a table with a green-shaded lamp, the circle of its light surgical and serene. There was a window bricked over from the outside, the ghost of its panes faintly visible in the mortar. There was dust that had learned to layer itself gently over sharp edges. On the wall above the table hung a portrait, and I would have sworn by whatever gods still linger over river cities that it had not been there when the door opened. It was a painting of a woman in a midnight-colored gown. Her hands were in her lap the way people hold their knives when they intend to use them for butter and perhaps for other things. She was neither young nor old. Age had chosen to delay the argument. What made me cold was not her expression, which was unsmiling but not cruel. It was the fact that I recognized her, not from any picture I had seen in a book, from the handwriting. It is a foolish thing, and I will be ashamed of it by morning. I have given the moon to a man who cannot swim. The great-grandmother, I said. He nodded. Muriel Vale. She was beautiful. She was exhausting, he said softly, and the weight of the word told me he was quoting an ancestor through another ancestor's tongue. What repeats? I asked, because I did not want to trouble the dead woman's gaze with my stillness. Her portrait, Cassian said. It does not stay where I put it. I have it in the main hall some days. The servants complain that the flowers wither near it. Some mornings it is in the dining room, where it watches the knives. Twice I've found it on the balcony, where it covers the place in the rail where my aunt once leaned too far to listen to the wind. When I bring it here, lock it in this room, it behaves for a time, and then it returns. I finished. He shook his head. It moves. Perhaps Anke moves it to play a trick, I suggested. Anke does not joke about the dead, he said. No one jokes in this house about the dead. Deo was he a prize to weigh Apollonie hand aways. And some. Then perhaps it is the riverman, I said, attempting flippancy, but the word man came out armored against something I could not name. Perhaps, he said, or perhaps it is guilt. Yours? My family's, he replied. But if it is guilt, I need to know whose. For that, I require a librarian. I looked at the painting. Muriel's eyes were not quite gray, not quite blue, something between water and winter. She wore a brooch at her throat, a small circle of not quite silver. The moon she had unhooked, perhaps, or its cheaper cousin. Why me? I said again softly, because I needed him to say it until it turned false. Because when you read, he said, you listen to what the book is trying not to tell you. I've seen you in the reading room with those letters. You lower your head as if you are bowing to the lie, and then you proceed to love the truth out of it anyway. And in return, I said, for my listening, I will pay you handsomely, and I will keep your secrets. You don't know my secrets. I know you've memorized every time the train stopped this year because you were waiting for someone who did not arrive on any of them. The ridiculous urge to tell him he was wrong rushed up my throat and vanished somewhere behind my teeth, terrified of the light. That is impertinent, I said. It is, he agreed. But it is accurate. And this house, Elara, is not kind to the inaccurate. You'll need to be rudely precise to survive it. The lamp hummed in its green circle. Dust settled with the faint pride of beasts domesticated by the idea of being needed. Muriel's painted mouth refused to explain anything. When do I start? I asked. You already have, he said, and reached past me to open one of the boxes. Inside were letters tied with ribbon the color of a good bruise. He placed them on the table like a priest placing bread and expectation. Begin with these. They are the correspondence between Muriel and a gentleman I cannot find in any other family record. His name appears once in full. I suspect his descendants took offense at how many times it did. Mr. Ardan Kestrel, I read aloud, my mouth rounding over the syllables as if tasting a fruit that forgot its own sweetness. Yes, Cassian said, find me his shadow in this house. And the portrait? I asked, glancing up. It had the decency not to move while I watched, which somehow offended me. If it goes wandering again, I will call you, he said. The servants could call me, I suggested. They will not, he said. They are willing to polish a haunting, but not to hold it. He left me in that basement room as if the house had told him it would be polite. For now, Anke brought me tea at some point, a sturdy cup that smelled like rain unpacking itself. I read until the lamp's patience began to curdle around the edges. I read until Muriel's voice began to settle into me, choosing which corners of my ribs to inhabit. Ardan Kestrel wrote in a hand that was all angles and refusal. He wrote like a man who disapproved of loops, but tolerated them in women. He wrote about the river as if he thought it could be bribed, which convinced me he had never lost anyone to it. He wrote about music. There was a violin, always a violin. He wrote about a bargain struck at midnight and a debt that would come due on the night of the third storm. Muriel wrote with the lilt of a woman pretending not to be clever for a man who pretended not to be afraid. She wrote about her brother's debts, about a sickness that had spared her when it should not have, about the way the city looked from the balcony when the wind forgot its manners. She wrote about a moon she had unhooked, about the river's peculiar kindness to men who lied beautifully. I looked up at the portrait often, the way one looks up during a prayer to see if anyone is listening. The little circle brooch glinted without light. Her painted mouth did not become kinder. If anything, she grew more certain, the way people do when you read about them until their words are more you than them. By the time the tea went cold, the house had yawned into the sort of quiet old wealth arranges for itself. I placed the last letter back in its ribbon. My fingers smelled of ink that had made up its mind and then changed it. I stood and stretched, and only then did the portrait move, not dramatically, not with a groan or a flurry of frames. I turned to pick up my coat from the back of the chair, glanced at the wall so as not to be rude, and saw that Muriel's gaze had shifted. It had been staring, as all portraits do, directly at the viewer with the decent pretense of not doing so. Now she looked to the right, towards the corner where the walls met in honest angles, her eyelids lowered, as if she were listening to something only that corner understood. I approached, forgetting to think about whether one should approach a painting as one approaches a dog one does not know. I stopped a breath away. Up close, the brushwork resolved into mercilessness. Her mouth was not only unsmiling, it was exhausted by the idea of being understood. The brooch at her throat had texture the painter had loved too well. In the paint, there was the faintest impression of the river, only a few strokes at the very bottom, as if the artist had tried to remember it and failed. "Muriel," I whispered, "because I am a librarian, and I think dead women deserve the courtesy of their names." "What do you want?" I expected nothing. Perhaps I expected dust, which is the patron saint of libraries and old houses. The answer I got instead was a heat behind my ear, a little thread of warmth that ran under my hair like a boundary broken by a careful footstep. I turned too quickly. The room was empty, the air obedient, the lamp hummed its green obedience. The boxes were reasonable, the door was closed. When I looked back at the portrait, her eyes had returned to mine, and then, on the table, where my scattered paper clips made a constellation I had not bothered to read, the shape of them shifted without hands, arranging themselves into a curve like a crescent, a moon wearing a bruise. I stepped back. My heart behaved like a bird caught temporarily in a shirt. "Cassian," I said, but the name did not carry. The room was a container that endured names without accepting them. I narrowed my eyes at the corner Muriel had been listening to. It was ordinary, stone, lime, the faint suggestion that once a mouse had considered a life there and then, chosen a better neighborhood. I walked to it. I placed my palm against the wall. It was cool, indifferent. "Promises," I said aloud, testing the word against the stones. "Collected at midnight." The house said nothing, but sometimes the absence of a sound is an answer. I sat down again and smoothed the ribbon of the letters, as if smoothing the hair of a child I had not birthed, but for whom I had reluctantly begun to love the chores. When Cassian returned, no knock, only a shadow falling more grandly into the room than shadows had any right to. He found me watching the portrait with the stubbornness of someone waiting for a lover who was late because he intended to be. "You saw it," he said. "She looked at the corner, and she does from time to time," he said. "The corner is older than the bricks that make it. The house changes its mind about how it was built." "That is not how houses work," I said. "That is not how people work," he countered. "And yet here we are. And the moon," I added, motioning at the paper clips. "Your ghosts can do parlor tricks." "Not ghosts," he said. "Guests, invited enemies, ancestors who never found the door out and are too proud to ask for directions. Or curses." He came to stand beside me, and I did not like the way the air decided to become an accomplice to his particular gravity. "You still don't believe in those, man. I believe in the things we do that insist on being done again by people who have not yet been born." That will suffice, he said. For now, what do you want me to do tonight? Read, he said. Read until the house tells you to stop, and when it tells you, listen. And if I do not hear it, you will, he said. And the confidence of the damned moved through his voice. He left again, because he was a man who knows the value of a withdrawal. I read, because I am a woman who knows the value of obedience when it is performed as if it were defiance. At 1 a.m, the house sighed. It was not a sound. It was a change in the weight of the walls, as if the stones had made a decision and wanted me to respect it. I gathered the letters. I tied their bruise-colored ribbon. I turned off the lamp, which complained like an ant who had sat too long. I stood, thinking I would go upstairs and find a room that did not belong to Muriel's gaze. That was when I heard it, the violin. It came from upstairs, not the elegant upstairs of chandeliers and business deals, but the upstairs above the upstairs, where attics develop their own private weather. The notes were not precise. They were a man's hands coaxing a memory of precision from an instrument that had lived too long in a coat. They were the sound of a promise kept at the wrong time. They were the river translated into wood. I went toward it because some sounds own your feet. The stairs above the library were not on any sensible floor plan. They turned where they wanted, hid when they were tired. I passed doors that pretended not to be doors. I passed a mirror that reflected me and Muriel's portrait both, although the portrait was 2 floors below us. I passed a window that admitted the moon with a familiarity that made me jealous. The violin beckoned. It did not beg. It didn't need to. The note stitched a line through the house, and I followed it as a seamstress follows a hem to the end of her work. At the topmost landing, there was a door without a handle. I knew it was the right door because I did not want it to know my name. The music was behind it, pouring itself through the gaps around the frame as if it were patient enough to be water. "Hello," I said. The violin stopped. Silence flared. "Muriel?" I tried, because I am loyal to my first ghosts. There was a breath mine or the house's. I could not say. Then a voice, low, the shape of it careful as a gentleman stepping through a flooded street. "You are not the master." I swallowed, and my throat clicked like a bad lock. "No, he has cell. You are softer," the voice said, and there was no decision in the way it made the word a compliment or a problem. The house lets you in without spitting you out. That is new. "I am the librarian," I said. He laughed, without joy. "A librarian," he repeated. "Then you have come to undo the damage of reading." "I have come," I said, and was surprised by how steady my voice was, "to ask who collects promises." Behind the door, a bow drew once across strings, a single line like a cut measured by a conscientious knife. "Everyone collects them," the voice said. "That is what a life is, a precinct of collected promises. The difference is who pays to keep them. And you haven't Hosa. I am the one they pay," he said, and the violin sang one note that told me I had never understood the river even after all those midnights on the bridge. "Arden Kestrel," I said, my mouth tasting of his ink. He did not answer for a long time. It was not a refusal. It was a decision to let the silence answer first. At last, "We used to throw pebbles at the windows, she and I," he said, and the words braided themselves around the years. "Children pretending to be thieves. We practiced being loyal to the wrong things. We were very good at it." "Muriel," I said. "She unhooked the moon," he said, and sounded almost grateful. "And the house has not forgiven her. He and us saved far." "No one is forgiven in this house," I said. That is why it hired you, he said. To keep an inventory of its sins. It likes to be admired for how many it has. Go down, librarian. Tell the master I will take his debt on the night of the third storm. Tell him he has time yet to learn the names of the winds. Why can't you tell him yourself? I asked, fingers on the seam of the door, feeling the difference between barrier and invitation. I do not speak to men who wear their reflections like armor, he said. I speak to women who keep their reflections folded in their pockets like knives. Go. I should have demanded more. I should have made him explain the debt. I should have told him I was not a messenger for ghosts who played violins in rooms the house refused to open. Instead, I obeyed, because sometimes surviving is agreeing to be frightened while your feet are still facing forward. I found Cassian in the study, not asleep, of course. Men like him do not sleep. They postpone consciousness until it returns with interest. He sat at the desk the way a general sits at a map, and in his hand was a glass with 1 inch of something that smelled like an apology. He spoke to you, he said, not lifting his eyes. He said you owe a debt due on the night of the third storm, I said. He told you to learn the names of the winds, and ain't. Cassian looked up then, and whatever expression he had been withholding from his face, he permitted it. Fear looks better on some people. It makes them honest. On others, it merely shows you they have suspected their whole lives that the bill would arrive. And how many storms do we get in a winter? He asked mildly. 3, I said. Always 3. Then the third will be ours, he murmured. We have time. For what? To decide who pays, he said. I set my hands on the desk because standing felt like arrogance in a room that had lived through 12 men's signatures and none of their apologies. What do you owe, Cassian? He didn't answer. He poured the last inch into his mouth and made himself a chalice. Do you believe me? I asked. He smiled without humor. Belief is a method of courtship, he said. I prefer to be married to facts, but I am Catholic enough in temperament to keep a mistress. I am not your mistress, I said. Nor my wife, he said. Nor my priest. You are the woman who listens to what the house is trying not to tell me. Tell me this, Ilara. Did he say her name? Muriel, I said. He nodded slowly, as if naming a ghost were a tax paid in proper coin. Then we will have to wake the dead politely, and, quote, it's the only way, he said, and then he looked at me with an intensity that made the room recede to a suggestion. Stay in the house tonight. Anke will see that a room is made ready. Do not sleep on the 6th floor. Why not? The 6th floor dreams, he said, and its dreams are contagious. I thought you didn't believe in curses, I said. I believe in floors, he replied, so softly it hardly counted as an untruth. I went to the room Anke prepared, on the 4th floor, an odd numbers patient sibling. The bed was too large for a woman who had lived the last 5 years in single dormitory loneliness, and the sheets were too smooth for someone whose skin remembered the bite of tennis-elbowed linen. I washed my face with water that came from the tap as if it regretted doing so. I brushed my hair with the borrowable comb on the vanity. I looked at the moon through the unashamed window. I did not sleep. I lay like a patient on a slab and listened to the house breathe and thought of a woman in a midnight-colored gown who had unhooked a moon and fastened it at her throat, and a man upstairs whose violin made the air taste like wet stone. I thought of Cassian Vale, who watched his servants' hands with respect and watched the river for laws he did not intend to keep. I thought of the back of the door without a handle and the way the music had passed through its seams, the way water passes through a wound. At some hour that had not been named yet, it began to rain. On the 4th floor it sounded gentle. On the 3rd perhaps it sounded like counsel. On the 6th, I suspected, it had learned the vowels of a scream. The first storm, I thought, counting like a woman bargains with her fate. There would be 2 more, and in between there would be reading, and in between there would be promises. Chapter 2. A Cartography of Promises. In the morning, the Vale House wore its daylight like a compromise. It did not pretend to be harmless. It merely lowered its voice. The rain had rinsed the city into a shallow palette of clean slates and smeared pewter. The lawn shone like a freshly licked lie. The windows blinked damply. Upstairs, the 6th floor thought its private thoughts. Downstairs, the staff drifted about their work in the solemn rhythm of people who had fallen in love with repetition and forgiven themselves for it. Anke appeared at my door with a tray balanced on her palm, as if gravity had agreed to a truce. "Breakfast," she said, "and Mr. Vale asks if the house ate you," and conned. "It chewed," I said. "It was polite enough not to swallow." "Polite," she mused. "That isn't a word I've squandered on this place." She set the tray down on the low table by the window. Butter and toast and a slice of grapefruit the color of a sun that had changed its mind about shining. When I reached for the mug, she watched my hand as if it were the opening move in a game I didn't yet know the rules to. "You heard it," she said. "The violin," I admitted, and a voice behind a door without a handle. Anke's eyes flicked toward the ceiling and back. She had a soldier's habit of working from the outside of a threat in. "He speaks when the house is generous," she said, "or when it is bored." "Do you believe in curses?" I asked, because repeating the question felt like laying a breadcrumb trail for sanity. "I believe in long debts," she said, "and long memories. He hired me because I don't get romantic about either." "I don't get romantic," I said too quickly. She smiled without showing teeth, which made the gesture gentler. "You do. You're just tidy about it." She left me there, with toast and the feeling of being witnessed. The grapefruit was sour enough to wake the vowels in my mouth. Outside, a gardener bent his back with the piety of a man who believes in weeds the way others believe in redemption. I drank the coffee and considered whether to be sensible, which was to say, to pack my single bag, to go down the stairs, to tell Cassian that his house needed a priest and a demolition crew and a better class of ghost, and then to go back to my 6th floor and the bakery's cinnamon breath and the familiar ache of wanting the wrong train. Instead, I took the diary, Muriel's voice, that precise, exasperated ink. The page I had bookmarked with a thread from the hem of my sleep shirt read, "He says the moon is borrowed, and I am the lender, but he is wrong. The moon lends herself. We are merely the pockets that pretend to own her." In the hall, the portraits leaned on their varnish. I felt them watch me as one watches a waltz learned only in theory. My palms were dry. My breath remembered the violin too intimately. I went downstairs like a woman who had decided to be practical by doing something extremely impractical and calling it research. The library unlatched its morning to me. Sun veined the panes. Dust floated with the elderly grace of society dowagers. I set Muriel's diary on the desk and opened the box with the bruise-colored ribbon. An index card lay atop the letters, now my handwriting from the small hours, a half-sketched system, a promise to myself to organize by date, by correspondent, by scent if I had to. The discipline steadied me. I arranged 3 piles. I stacked paperweights like little obediences. I breathed as if the room had given me permission. Cassian entered without a sound, which should not have surprised me. Men raised by marble learn to be quiet the way wolves learn to be hungry. "You stayed," he said. "I don't run before breakfast," I replied. "An admirable rule," he said. He was dressed with a kind of care that pretends not to be care. Dark suit, paler shirt, a tie the exact shade of a bruise that doesn't show through a silk stocking. His watch was simple. His mouth was not smiling, but it had thought about it. "May I?" He gestured to the second chair by the desk. I nodded. He sat with a booked-up man's economy, as if he intended to leave and wanted to be able to do it beautifully at any moment. "Tell me what you heard," he said. "You want my impressions or my transcript?" "Both." "The voice called me softer than you," I said, "and called you the master with all the sarcasm of a bitter valet. He said the house let me in without spitting me out. He said he used to throw pebbles at the windows with Muriel. He said he collects promises. He told me to tell you the debt comes due on the night of the third storm." Cassian's jaw made the tiniest gesture, a muscle remembering something it had intended not to feel. "And you believe him?" "It ever. I believe in a violin behind a handleless door," I said. "Belief in rest is negotiable." He tapped a finger on the desk. Once, the sound was inappropriately intimate. "Third storm," he said. "The weather report suggests a front coming in Thursday night, another Saturday. If the pattern repeats, Monday," I said, "or Tuesday. Weather obeys rules until it doesn't." "You know the names of winds?" he asked, repeating the voice's imperative as if tasting whether it was poisonous. "I know the way they sound through sash windows," I said. "There is the east wind that strips suppers of conversation and clothes of heat, the south wind that smells like someone else's garden, the west wind that remembers where it has been, the north wind that never apologizes." "And which pays debts?" "None of them," I said. "They collect. We pay." His mouth did that flicker again. "We," he repeated, as if he were a man who had learned to be alone religiously. "Your house," I said. "Your ghosts. Your librarian. We." He stood then, abruptly. Not to flee, precisely, but to feel taller than the fear. "Come," he said. "You need the rest of the map." He led me to the portrait hall, where the ancestors ranked themselves in orderly condemnations. He stopped before Muriel's painting. She was back on the wall where she had been the first time. The brooch at her throat had caught a sliver of late sun and held it like a coin between two forefingers. "Forgive my mother," he said quietly. "I don't know her," I replied, startled by the apology in a house that preferred pride. "I don't mean you," he said. "I mean her." He looked at Muriel as if he wanted the paint to move again and tell him how to climb out of a well he'd fallen into as a boy. She despised this portrait. Not Muriel, my mother, despised the portrait. When I was a child, she told me Muriel was a thief, that she had stolen the luck from the line, that every woman after her paid. Paid for what? His smile. For loving a man she wasn't given, he said, and the word given had at least 3 meanings curled up inside it, one of which was sold. My mother believed in the ledger of bloodlines. She believed women should not write in the margins. "And you?" I asked. "I believe in ledgers," he said, "not bloodlines. The world has only a few languages it truly respects. Numbers are one, law is another, appetite is a third." And then he reached toward the portrait and did not touch it. "Then there's the language of whatever this is, the grammar of consequence." "Love," I said, "because someone needed to be untidy." He glanced at me sharply. as if I'd been impertinent enough to name a child not mine. "If that's the word that will make the house speak, use it," he said. "But do not expect me to use it for free." We stood in that corridor that smelled of varnish and vinegar and money. Muriel's painted gaze refused to blink. I became aware, in the prickle of my neck, that we were being watched not only by ancestors but by staff. A maid with a tray scurried past without looking up. A footman paused as if reconsidering the physics of silence, then dissolved into the staircase with superhuman decorum. "Walk with me," Cassian said. We went out into the garden, where the rain had left pearls in the privet hedges, and the statues glistened like creatures who had just remembered they used to be mortal. The path curved toward a folly, a little stone temple erected by someone who didn't like temples but liked the idea that he could afford to dislike them. Cassian didn't speak, and the quiet stretched long enough to become a species of trust. At the edge of the lawn, a low wall separated the Vale property from the drop to the lake. The water had changed its mind about being a river and sprawled itself like an exhausted god. Gulls flew with the elegant idiocy of beautiful scavengers. The wind was recurring, one of the ones I had named, west perhaps. It brought with it the scent of 1,000 small ships that would never be built. "Muriel used to climb over here," Cassian said, touching the wall with his fingertips. "She would sit with her feet on the wrong side. My great-grandfather hated it. He told her to be careful. He told her to keep her ankles inside the family." Cassian's mouth bent. "He married a woman with ankles like iron bars. She tried to shame my mother for her softness. My mother tried to shame me for mine. I learned to wear steel under cashmere." Wind pressed the grass to its knees. A white butterfly beleaguered a rose to no avail. "What did she do?" I asked. "Muriel, beyond the window pebbles and the moon." He looked at me, and the part of me that was always cataloging the men I met for evidence of kindness and its counterfeits paused with its pen in the air. "She bought time," he said, "with someone else's." "The riverman?" I asked, and felt ridiculous as soon as the words left my mouth. "Ardan," he said, without disdain. "If the house is using your tongue, I won't cut it for blasphemy. How does one buy time?" "The way one buys anything one cannot afford," he said. "Credit and a lie." I wanted to be cruel to him in that moment, because he was speaking like a human business and not like a grandson. "You make it sound like a transaction," I said. "It was," he said. "All the great romances are. Don't look at me like that. I don't mean the money. I mean the arithmetic of desire. I give you the shape of my wanting. You give me the geography of your consent. We pretend it is a miracle so we can live with the interest." "That isn't how I read," I said. And the words were out before I could reverse them. He turned. "No? I read like a thief who breaks in to return what was stolen," I said. "I read to give things back their names." He considered that, and the consideration softened him in ways I would have preferred to be immune to. "Then give me a name," he said, "for what Muriel did. 8. Desperation dressed as bravery," I said, "or bravery dressed as desperation, depending on whether the dress was white that day or red." He nodded, slowly, as if there were a church bell in his skull and it needed to be rung with respect. "Ardan promised her a reprieve," he said. "From debt, from a marriage, from a sickness. The diary hints, the letters dance. My mother always said the price came due with my aunt's fall, my aunt who listened too close to the balcony's edge and learned gravity's umlaut." "The balcony," I said. "He found the portrait there." "Twice," he said, "and once After my aunt's funeral, my mother woke to find Muriel's brooch on her pillow, and the moon, I murmured. Or its counterfeit, he said. My mother threw it into the lake. It came back 3 days later in the bread box. Of course it did, I said. Curses are nothing if not domestic. He laughed, sudden and brief, and the sound made the gulls wheel as if the air had changed its permissions. Domestic, he said. Yes, that fits. All right, librarian. Make me a map. Of what? Of the promises, he said. Who made them? Who collected them? Who handed them off when they became too heavy to hold as their own? Draw me how the debt traveled. Your hands like cartographers, your mind like a spy. I should have told him, maps aren't my art. Indexes are. But the challenge lit a little candle inside me I hadn't bothered with in months. A job, a structure, a path from question to pattern. I'll need rooms, I said, where she wrote, where you keep the family papers, where the servants whisper, the balcony, the handleless door. You'll have them, he said. Anke will unlock what can be unlocked. The rest, his eyes passed upward, toward the 6th floor or higher. The rest will unlock you. He left me in the garden with the wind and the wall and the lake's long memory. When I returned inside, the house smelled faintly of lemon peel and tobacco leaf and the irresistible fatigue of mornings becoming afternoons. Anke met me at the back stair with a ring of keys that clinked like a psalm. Rooms, she said. Forgive me, I said. I don't know how to ask for what I need without sounding like a burglar. You are a burglar, she said. The kind we hire. Which first? The writing room, I said. If she had one. She had 3, Anke said, and the corner of her mouth acknowledged how annoying that had been for the maids. But she used the east solarium for letters in the afternoons. We walked the corridor on the 2nd floor to a door with glass panes artfully frosted to suggest privacy without enforcing it. The solarium was a room that loved light too much to be trusted. Plants curled in pots, with the smirk of things that photosynthesize better than humans breathe. A faint smudge on the wall marked where a writing desk had once leaned. The current occupant was an elegant chaise, faintly disreputable in the way expensive furniture can be when it has overheard too many confessions. I crossed to the wall and pressed my palms to the smudge. There is a science to residue. There is also a superstition. The wall cool under my skin, then warmer, then something like the vibration of a memory waking. I closed my eyes. The house did not mind. Ink. Roses past their pride. A window open when it should not have been. Footsteps that wanted to be heard badly enough to pretend they were accidental. And a sentence, the 3rd storm wears a familiar face. I opened my eyes too quickly, as if I'd been underwater and preferred not to know what I was surfacing into. Anke stood with the patience of a person who had watched several varieties of madness get dressed and had handed each of them their gloves. What? She said. She wrote it, I said. Here, the 3rd storm wears a familiar face. Who's the face? She didn't say. I was shaking, not visibly, I hoped. The tremor ran along a wire inside me, not out to the skin. Where else? The balcony, Anke said. You'll want that in daylight. We went. The balcony had the decency to be beautiful in the ways that cause problems. It strolled the length of the house like an invitation. The balustrade was robust, white, contemptuous of human fragility. The view was too large for anyone's good. I put my hands on the rail. Cold, honest. The wind licked at my sleeves. A smear of something dark was caught in the crevice where two stones met juice or old paint or the memory of a glove. She leaned, Anke said, not looking at me, not looking at the drop, looking instead at a point just beyond both. She didn't jump. Did anyone say she did? People say what makes them feel cleanest, Anke said. I've learned not to interview feelings when I need facts. Who found her? Cook, Anke said. A woman who has never burned a caramel. She hates the balcony. She says it knows too much. Does the house? I stopped, uncertain if I wanted to sound like someone who asked houses for gossip. Does it ever push? Anke's mouth tightened. It doesn't need to. People throw themselves to conclusions. I knelt and touched the smear, dried, flaked, clung anyway. My breath made a ghost on the cold stone. When I stood, the wind had shifted north, apology gone from it, vowels straightened into bone, and the third storm, I said. What does the master do when it storms? Walks, Anke said. Talks to no one. Counts stairs. He chooses rooms that make sense only to him. He has a way of standing perfectly still for too long. The house pretends not to notice, then sulks. Has anyone else heard the violin? Anke's eyes slid toward the topmost eaves, where the roofline practiced dignity. A few, she said. They don't last. I am not leaving, I said, surprising both of us. I didn't ask you to, she said. We toured more rooms. The morning room with its porcelain that had never risked a mouth. The winter parlor where the fire had a pedigree and the poker a temper. The small chapel with its stained glass that insisted on rendering saints as tired men with good hair. In each, I listened with my hands, walls, table edges, the backs of chairs that had held men long dead who had insisted on leaning the exact same improper way. The house gave me crumbs, a laugh that wasn't a laugh, a single tear on a window pane in a room that had been locked for a week, a rhyme whispered by a governess under her breath about weather and women and the cost of wearing white. After an hour, the crumbs began to make a trail. It led me back predictably to the basement room with the bricked-over window and Muriel's portrait glaring down propriety. The paperclips still lay in their crescent. My piles waited with patience and intent. I sat and I read, and I let the letters teach me their scandal. Muriel's words, careful, incendiary. Arden's sharp, elegant, cruel without trying. The bargain came into focus the way images do in a dark room. Red light, chemicals, patience. Her brother, it seemed, had a talent for cards and a poverty of luck. Their father had died with a signature that had pleased no one but his creditors. A marriage had been proposed to solve everything the way a lid solves water. Muriel had written, I am not a pan to be covered, and I will not be boiled. Arden had replied, then we must become steam. Between them, a plan. Not quite legal, not quite criminal, a transfer of holdings at midnight, 3 witnesses who drank too much to describe what they'd seen, a forged letter of credit with handwriting I recognized 2 pages later as Muriel's own, to buy time, for a season, for a storm, and threaded through it all, sentences that vibrated like plucked strings. I will owe you. I will owe you a storm. I will owe you the third. I got up. I did not know I had decided to stand until my chair made the sound of loss. Cassian, I called, and the way his name vaulted itself off the stone made me feel briefly like a bell ringer. He came as men come when they know they are wanted and have not yet decided whether they will admit to it. He paused at the threshold, watching my face the way men who do not want to be surprised watch weather. She wrote it, I said. Plainly, this time. The third storm. He did not ask where. I handed him the letter. He read with the impatience of someone who has been taught all his life that the words will obey him and has never learned how to wait for the ones that won't. Halfway down the page his mouth went still, then crooked not into a smile, exactly into the shape a danger makes when it realizes it has become inevitable. She was clever, he said. She was cornered, I replied. They are not mutually exclusive. No, I said, they aren't. Isnans. He set the letter down like a man who has just held the throat of an old certainty and decided to let it breathe for one more hour. So, he said, we owe him the third storm, which is a metaphor. It is a contract, I said, a romantic one, which is worse. Worse? He sounded amused, and I wanted unhelpfully to please him for being amused. Contracts written in law are at least honest about their teeth, I said. The ones written in love pretend to be kisses until you notice the blood. He looked at me then with a sharpened interest, as if he were a man in a gallery discovering that one painting had moved while he'd been admiring another. Who taught you to talk like that? And, books, I said. And men. I see, he said, and his gaze moved over my face, not like a lover's, not yet, but like a tactician's, mapping elevations and soft borders. All right. If it is a contract, can it be renegotiated? With whom? I asked. The river? The violin? Ardan, he said. If he is a man who lives upstairs and threatens debts in the language of weather, he can be bargained with. He said he does not speak to men who wear their reflections like armor. His mouth bruised around a syllable of disdain. Then you will bargain, he said. With what? Whatever you have, he said, and I hated how easy it was for him to say it. Reputation, wit, time. The house likes you. Use it. The house doesn't like anyone, I said. It tolerates the interesting. That will do, he said. There is a moment in any story when a thing tips from haunting to courtship. I felt that tilt then. The house had noticed me. I had noticed back. Cassian had named me as strategy and as shield. And underneath it all, a current, the old, slippery thing no one says out loud because it cements fate and calls lightning. You're asking me to speak for you, I said. I'm asking you to buy me time, he said, and the echo of Muriel's letters made my bones hum. You are a librarian. You know how to borrow. I stared at him. He did not look away. Outside, the wind shouldered the window with a familiarity that would have been scandalous in any other century. All right, I said. I'll try. Good, he said. Tonight, when the house remembers, it's lonely. He left because he preferred not to witness agreement after he had won it. Anke appeared in his wake like a shadow that had invented discretion and patented it. Don't go to the 6th floor, she said. If you must talk to him, do it from the landing. Do you think I'll fall? I asked. I think the house likes you, she answered, and that will go to its head. Afternoon slouched into a dim, damp evening. Cook sent up a tray of soup and something ambitious with fennel. Because grief and hunger take the same spoon, I ate. I read the same paragraph 3 times and then laughed at myself because either I was a fool or a believer and, God help me, the difference had shrunk to vanity. At 11, I rose. My heart had put on its good shoes. The staircase to the topmost landing curved as if it had been taught to dance by a person with a cruel teacher. The handleless door glimmered at the end of the twist, like a secret that has learned not to be shy. Hello, I said, and did not use his name because I had learned some things in libraries and more in rooms with men who thought they were them. The violin replied 2 notes, question and yes. The bow was dry. The sound made my molars ache. I have an offer, I said. Everyone does, the voice said. That's how you get into the habit of speaking. You said the debt is due on the night of the 3rd storm, I said. Take something else. A pause. A long one. The house leaned in, not with wood, but with listening. What coin? He asked. Time, I said, because it was the only honest currency I had. 1 week, no collection until then, no accidents, no lonely rails. He drew the bow across the strings once in a gesture that was almost a laugh. You ask a collector to delay because you have no appetite for the ledger, in case. I ask because you asked me to, I said. Someone taught Muriel to borrow. She paid with storms. Teach me to borrow, I'll pay with days. And if you cannot repay, I can, I said. And I despised how much of my life had trained me to put iron under vowels that didn't deserve it. I am not her. I am not your old arithmetic. Behind the door, the violin hushed. The silence thinned. Who will give me those days? He asked. I will, I said. The sequence of my own treachery shocked me and then didn't. There are offers you make that you know will tattoo themselves on your future, and there are offers that leap from you like a hand to catch a body falling off a balcony. You? He said, not mocking, curious. Yes, I said, with a steadiness I manufactured and then unexpectedly inhabited. Mine. A whisper of bow hair catching on a rough string, a nod perhaps, the shape of it passing under the door like a draft. 1 week, he said. From the 2nd storm to the 3rd, I'll teach you a wind. What wind? The one that wears a familiar face, he said. Bring a mirror. The hair on my arms rose. The house shivered like a well-dressed animal. And Cassian? I asked. He is not to be pushed over any edges, literal or figurative. He doesn't fall, the voice said. He bargains. That's why he hires women who know how to read. Adi tev race. Nord tourney. I exhaled, not relief, but its neighbor. Then we have an accord. Not yet, he said. You have to come back tomorrow night and say it again so the house can hear it 3 times. Houses are superstitious. Tomorrow, I said, and the night after. And bring that diary, he added, almost absently. I like to see what the dead thought they were doing. Ardan, I said, before I could stop myself. He did not answer. When I returned to the library, Muriel's portrait was not on the wall. It had moved to the desk, propped against the inkstand, her eyes level with the place where my hands would be when I wrote. Fine, I told her, as if that would save anyone. Watch. Decide. He will. I took a sheet of paper. I took a pen. I began to draw the map Cassian had demanded. Dates, arrows, names. A geography of promises, its borders inked with the dark river of consequence. At the top of the page, I wrote the title because some work requires the courtesy of a headline. The 3rd storm. A ledger of what we owe. When the house sighed, the window glass trembled. Somewhere above, the violin tried 3 notes and decided to keep them. I was not a lover. I was a librarian. I was not brave. I was cornered by curiosity. I was not a saint. I was a woman who had just promised a week of her life to a stranger in a room without a handle. And still, with my map in front of me and my pulse a thoughtful drum, I felt something reckless and not wholly mine turn toward Cassian Vale, as if he were heat in a house that required heat to be expensive. The second storm would come. It would wear a familiar face. I went to the window and looked out at the lake that had once been a river, and in the glass my reflection looked back at me as if ready to be lent, and somewhere in the house a man who was not alive and not dead tuned his bow. The night had found its new arithmetic, and I had agreed to be part of the sum. Chapter 3. The Wind That Knows Your Name. By noon, the clouds had gathered like conspirators. They did not yet speak thunder. They held counsel in gray. The lake responded by darkening into a single, deliberate eye. The gardener lifted his head as if listening for a verdict. Even the bakery 3 neighborhoods away, whose breath usually reached me invisibly, seemed to inhale and hold itself still. I had slept a slice of an hour, a mean little quarter that did nothing for my bones and everything for my resolve. I woke with the taste of resin on my tongue and the knowledge that I had promised a week of myself to a man with a voice like varnish and a violin bow for a tongue. In this light, promises felt less romantic and more like instruments. Things one sharpens, cleans, uses. Cassian had not appeared at breakfast. Anke delivered coffee and a bowl of dark cherries that made me think of old bruises and secret parties. "He's in the city," she said. "Meeting." "With whom?" "People who wear cufflinks to lunch," she said, which was both adequate and unhelpful. "He'll be back before the rain takes the house." "The rain takes the house?" She made a motion with her palm, tipping it as if to spill water down unseen steps. "You'll see." I worked in the library until mid-afternoon, translating letters into roots. The map on the desk multiplied. Names begat arrows, arrows begat little annotations. I color-coded nothing. I did not trust color here. Instead, I underlined in a single disciplined shade and penciled a legend only I knew how to read. Muriel had written an entry on an April day when the lilacs had broken their vows and bloomed early. It was addressed not to Ardon but to herself. "You think you are clever, but cleverness is just the river agreeing with you because it wants to keep you talking while it rises." I circled it 3 times. It felt like a warning laid down on the doorstep years in advance of a visitor. At 2, a quiet knock sounded, and cook appeared, wiping her hands on an apron that had seen enough butter to hold an imprint forever. She had eyes like hard candy, sweet and unyielding. "If the lady intends to stand on the balcony when the storm's at its middle, she had better eat," she announced, as if I'd ordered it. "I don't intend," I began, and then caught my own mouth misbehaving. "Thank you. Soup storm better than bread," she said, depositing a bowl with something green in it that tasted like spring if spring had a mother who was a strict nun. "And if you hear the chimneys sing, come down." "The chimneys sing when they are lonely," she said, "and when they are excited. This house can't tell the difference. Can you?" "I've got a butcher's ear," she said, proud and pragmatic at once. "I can tell a longing from a hunger. I also." She left me with the soup and a hornet of curiosity humming under my ribs, a house that sang loneliness up its smokestacks, a cook who could distinguish a longing from a hunger. I thought of Cassian and felt something I refused to taxonomize. Rain arrived with ceremony. First a scout 3 hard drops that struck the library window like an impatient knuckle. Then a pause in which the house inhaled. Then the downpour, a drawn curtain, the sound of 1,000 small hands applauding a performance they had paid to believe. The light went from pewter to pew. The portraits took on the solemnity of people who approve of weather because it justifies their coats. I went to the balcony. The air had that quality storms give it when they are old enough to remember other storms. The lake stung itself with rings. Trees bowed in the wind with the supple arrogance of things that know their roots hold. I stood at the balustrade, cool stone under my palms, and tried to imagine Muriel's ankles on the wrong side of the boundary. Anke's step ghosted behind me. "If you mean to meet him on the landing tonight," she said softly, "don't talk to any mirrors before you have to." "Why?" "They tell the truth too early," she said. "He asked me to bring one." "Bring it," she said, "but don't let it think it's doing you a favor." She withdrew into the doorway, leaving me with rain and the small discipline of breath. I thought of the wind that wears a familiar face. What face would the wind wear for me? Not my own. My face is practical, suspicious of flattery. Not my mother's. She died the year the trains cut their routes, leaving me with a shoebox of tickets and the habit of going to stations for the kindness of announcements. Perhaps the wind would borrow the fact of my insomnia and make a face out of sleeplessness. Perhaps it would be a man's face, which I refused to consider until I realized refusal was a form of rehearsal. At 4, Cassian returned. You could feel it. The front door letting in not only a man and the cold slither of rain, but the geometry that props up his shoulders. He shrugged off the weather and a silk-lined coat and sent a current through the hallway that made the sconces reconsider their dimness. When he came to the library, he had the look of someone who had convinced 3 hostile rooms to agree with him and disliked that it had taken so long. "Storm number 2, he said, setting his phone down as if it were a small dog that barked too much. "Second act," I said. "The audience wants their blood." And Oleva. He glanced at the map on the desk, and the way Muriel's portrait had insinuated itself into my workspace like a chaperone with unresolved ambitions. "Progress, a ledger becoming a confession," I said. She borrowed. He lent. The house kept score in the weather. "And you?" His eyes had the courteous chill of a scalpel washed and set on a sterile tray. "What did you promise him?" There it was. We were both too clever to pretend ignorance would keep us safe. "A week," I said, "from the second storm to the third. No collection until then." He looked not at me but at a point a few inches to my left, as if the air there had said my words, and he preferred not to make intimacy with air. "And the coin?" "Mine." He returned his gaze to me then, and if there was anger in it, it was anger with a leash on. "You will tell me what that means." "It means," I said, matching his clarity, "that time will come from me if it must come at all, that he doesn't touch you until the third storm, that you have days to do what you think you need to do." "And what do you think I need to do?" He had moved closer without my noticing. His voice had acquired that soft steadiness men use when they are either very gentle or about to break something expensive. "Decide what debt you believe you owe," I said, "because if you improvise on the night, the house will eat the ad-lib." "Andy, that's amateur theater," he said. "This is worse," I said. For a moment the storm did something unusual. It retreated, or pretended to, as if it were interested in eavesdropping. The quiet made our next breaths visible. He looked at my hands, ink-stained, reasonable, and then at my mouth, as if measuring the distance between what I had promised and the muscles that would pay it. "I didn't ask you to pledge yourself," he said, finally. "No," I said. "You hired me to catalog your ghosts. I did not consult you about offering myself to one of them." That's impertinent, he said. No heat, an observation, like a line on a balance sheet. I know, I said. I learned from the best, and most stand. The pause that followed was a room we both walked around without entering. At last he nodded once, a movement that conceded nothing and recognized everything. Very well, he murmured. If you are currency, you are not to be counterfeit. If you are to pay, you will not pay in silence. I will know the terms. Jealous? I meant to make it a joke. The word put on a dress it had not worn in my mouth before and strutted. He laughed. It was low, involuntary, and better than I deserved. Possessive of clarity, he said, and of the living people who walk the fault lines in my house. I am not your anything, I said, because some sentences keep bones aligned. No, he said, but I am your employer. The crash of thunder that followed the word felt like punctuation arranged by a playwright with a sense of humor and an unkind streak. He exhaled, tipping his head back as if the ceiling had given him news. All right, he said, you will have what you asked me for, time. I will give you something you did not ask for, access. To what? To the room behind the handleless door. My ribs considered being visible. How? The house unlocks itself for 3 things, he said. Music, weather, and a price paid with interest. Meet me there at 11. I will bring the 3rd. You said the house unlocked itself for 3 things, I said. That was only 2. Rand. You're the 3rd, he said. Try not to be insulted. Try not to be charming. I shot back, because the alternative was to be something softer. He left to change, to feed the part of the day that demanded numbers. I stood alone with rain and letters and a portrait that had learned patience by practicing cruelty. I copied one more passage into my notes, underlining it not because I feared forgetting, but because I needed the comfort of the line itself, dark and decisive. When the river wants something, it takes the shape of what you love and asks for a kiss. At 10, the storm was at its middle. The chimneys sang. It was not a melody. It was not even a moan. It was the sound of wind encountering edges and deciding to turn its face into song because anger was too obvious. The house shuddered with it, joy and loneliness present in equal parts. Cook's warning threaded through my ribs. I came down from the balcony, away from railings and their lessons. I found a hand mirror in a guest room where the wallpaper had not decided whether blue was luxurious or cruel. Its backing was tarnished silver. Its face was unapologetically honest. When I held it up, my reflection looked like someone who had forgotten to take her own pulse. I touched my throat. Beat there, steady. I set the mirror in my pocket, handle peeking like a scandal. The corridor to the topmost landing had developed shadows where there had been none. A draft moved as if chasing someone who had passed just before me. I climbed. Each step was a conversation my foot had to win. By the time the handleless door greeted me, I had the curious sensation of having walked into a thought the house had been thinking all afternoon. Cassian arrived without announcing himself. I don't know why I expected him to keep the habit of soft shoes. Perhaps I had already mistaken the storm for permission. He wore black, unadorned, which made the white of his cuffs look like little flags of surrender he had no intention of waving. In his hand, a key that did not look like a key, a length of iron with teeth on only one side and an arrogance I recognized. The house disapproves, he said mildly, showing me the key, which means this is probably necessary. What is it? An inheritance. He did not add from whom. The answer would carry its own weather. Are you ready? I brought a mirror, I said. Of course you did, he murmured. Hold it. I did. The mirror felt heavier than its size deserved, the way small truths do when you are compelled to carry them to someone who will not thank you. He slid the iron into a seam that was not a keyhole until he touched a pocket of resistance, and the door, which had no interest in obeying any of us, sighed. Not open, reluctant, a gap offered itself like a compromise. The room breathed. The smell was what startled me. Resin and linseed, wood and a bitter thread of old smoke. It smelled like a violin when it has been taken out of its case and tuned in the dark. The space itself was not large, attic-sized, slanted ceiling, a window like a slit in a tired eyelid. A chair, a music stand, a table with a bottle that had learned the language of dust. Against the far wall, a case, coffin-shaped, with brass that had turned the color of old coins found in a riverbed. Ardan, Cassian said, lightly, like a man who knew names could be a pair of handcuffs. We are inside. No reply. The storm argued with the eaves. The chimneys sang. The house listened, not benevolent. Show me your wind, I said into the silence, and lifted the mirror. There is an intimacy to seeing your own face by command. It felt indecent. My eyes met mine, the left a fraction more skeptical than the right, a detail I had not previously respected. Behind my shoulder, Cassian's half-reflection, sharp as a punctuation mark. And then the glass turned dark, not a blink, but a low tide. It did not become opaque, it became deeper. My face retreated an inch, then two, as if walking backward into a lake. In its place another face lifted, as if the water had decided to be a window on someone else's room. He was younger than his voice. Or perhaps he was both at once, the way the dead are when the house keeps them in its pantry. High cheeks unsoftened by drink, a mouth cut for refusal, eyes pale in a way that announced appetite and disdain in matched portions. He wore arrogance easy, like a shirt you forget you never paid for. Librarian, Ardan said, not with welcome and not with contempt. You are punctual. I approve. And he had said, approving is an inexpensive hobby, I said before I could stop myself. Cassian's shoulder moved in what might have been warning or pride. Ardan's reflection flicked, amused and sharpened. It must be expensive to be you, he observed. You seem to keep going to rooms that want to keep you. I did not let him have the first angle. The third storm, I said. We have days. You promised. I promised. He shifted his gaze to Cassian, not to acknowledge him, more like a man checking the weather through a window he didn't like. You've taught her to bargain. She taught herself, Cassian said. Ardan returned to me. And what will you buy with your week of coin? Truth, I said. Enough to renegotiate, or to make paying beautiful? He laughed. The real kind, brief and startling, as if someone had taken a photograph of his first honest sound. You are a trouble, he said. Muriel loved troubles. She pinned them to her dress and insisted they were jewelry. You owe her kindness, I said. Whatever she owed you, she paid it with a life full of consequences. Everyone pays, he said, not cruelly. Everyone forgets to read the fine print. It is not my fault that ink loves the small. Then show me the fine print, I said, and the mirror shifted in my fingers, heavier, the silver backing warming as if a hand had pressed against it from the other side. He considered. You could see the bargain maker working, an abacus behind pale eyes. He had the look of a man who had learned to write contracts on fogged windows because paper remembered better than he wanted. Very well, Ardan said. A wind for a week. You will give me 7 days. I will give you the name of the storm that will take him. Take whom? Cassian said, voice flat. Names are mirrors, Ardan replied without looking at him. We will be economical. His gaze claimed mine entirely. Hold the glass steady. Do not look away. I won't, I said, and discovered, unhappily, that my voice had already decided to belong to this moment. The mirror breathed. That is what it felt like. A small animal drawing air for the first time. The glass clouded, cleared, then filled with movement, not images, currents. The sense of air learning to be wild. I heard my name, Elara, spoken in a tone that had never been used at me before, fond and annoyed and certain of my answer. My throat closed. The wind rose in the chimney and sang a note that sounded like almost, "What do you see?" Cassian asked, his words careful around my attention. "A threshold," I said. "A boy's hand stealing matches. A woman who decides to become winter and then does. Water in the shape of a man's back. A balcony that thinks it is innocent." I swallowed. "A key with teeth on one side, a mace." "Describe the wind," Ardan said. "If you can name it, you can call it by something other than grief." "It knows my name," I heard myself say. "It has been practicing. It sounds like trains leaving, not arriving. It sounds like pages turning when the page you want won't appear. It carries cinnamon and tobacco and violin rosin." Cassian's breath caught. The sound of a man startled by an intimacy he isn't sure he was invited to. "So," he said, rough. "It's mine." "No," Ardan said. "It is hers. It merely passes through you." "Can it be unlearned?" I asked, eyes burning, mirror steady. "Only by paying," Ardan said, "or by becoming it." "Becoming the wind?" "And everyone who loves too long becomes weather," he said. "Some of us are given storms. Some of us make them." "Teach me the name," I said. "Not the metaphor, the word." He leaned closer, no physical movement. Yet his face filled the glass until the edge of the mirror felt like cold teeth at my fingers. He whispered. The syllables licked the silver and ran down the nerves in my hand. I didn't recognize the language. I recognized its purpose. It was the type of word that opens doors too old for keys. I repeated it. My mouth argued. My breath obeyed. The room buckled. Not the wood space. The violin case against the wall made a sound like a closed throat. The house answered with a soft, delighted groan. "Good girl," Ardan murmured. "Do not," Cassian said, and it was the first time I had heard a command from his mouth that I wanted to obey for reasons that had nothing to do with hire. Ardan smiled, mean and beautiful. "You will call it on the night," he told me, as if Cassian had not spoken. "You will present the wind as a witness, and you will ask it who deserves to pay." "And it will answer?" I said. "It will do what winds do," he said. "It will move through everyone and show you who bends." The mirror dimmed as if an eyelid closed. When my reflection returned, I looked older by half an hour and 10 years. Cassian took the mirror from me and set it down with more care than I had seen him give to anything that wasn't ink. "What did he say?" he asked. I told him everything but the taste of the word, which felt too intimate to share between 11:13 p.m. and a man who wore his restraint like a good suit. He listened with his eyes on my mouth, which made grammar risky. When I finished, The storm thudded a handful of rain against the roof with the indifferent generosity of applause. "You have your week," he said softly. "Spend it like a miser." "And you?" I said. He took a step toward me, only one. It was enough. The air, which had been doing a passable imitation of being mine, decided to belong to whatever moved with him. "I will do what I do best," he said. "Learn what it will cost, and make it look like a choice." "You're good at that," I said. "I am." He reached slowly. He did not touch me. He adjusted the line of my collar, unnecessary and precise, as if correcting a typo on a page he would later sign. The gesture should have been nothing. It felt like a library burning on a cold day. "I do not want your week," he said, voice unusually raw. "I want your skill, your unkind honesty, your habit of reading margins and hearing ink." "But Des—" "You want," I said, because someone needed to say the word out loud so it would stop gnawing on everyone's ankles. "That is dangerous in this house." He smiled then. "Not beautiful in the obvious way, beautiful in the way a door is when it opens into a room you didn't know you needed. Everything worth keeping is." He left before I could anywhere near the edge of an answer. The door softened shut behind him, not latched, not trusting me with the latch. The room exhaled. The mirror on the floor reflected the ceiling as if studying a patient it intended to cure or condemn. "Muriel," I said to the air that had carried her notes, and Arden's voice and Cassian's caution, "did you think you were saving anyone?" Somewhere, low in the house, something metal chimed, a clock or a restraint acknowledging midnight's jurisdiction. I returned the mirror to its theft in my pocket and went back down through the rooms, each of which took a quick inventory of my face and decided to let me pass. "In the library," I wrote. Not the map words, a letter addressed to no one and to fate, a list of the debts I had kept, the ones I had failed, the ones I had pretended, were favors so they would not molder in the dark like unpaid promises. It steadied me. It also betrayed me. I watched my hand write Cassian's name as if it were doing triage and had reached the patient most likely to survive. I folded the paper and slipped it into Muriel's diary. Between the pages where she had described the shape of Arden's refusal and the price of the moon against her throat. The portrait on the desk looked pleased with my blasphemy. "Don't be smug," I told her. "You started this." The storm wandered off about 2. The house, sated, leaned into its joints. In the lean I felt the weight of what I had gathered. A wind with a name that hated being said. A man who had learned how not to fall. Another who had learned how to play debts on gut and horsehair. A woman with a brooch that pinched light until it bled. Sleep, when it came, was temporary and tactical. Morning brought a sky scoured clean, and a city debating whether to be forgiven. The house dried itself in panels. The gardener declared the roses chastened. On the street, someone laughed at a joke that got the place it deserved. I ate bread that had learned humility in an oven, and I avoided the balcony because love is a balcony, and I had decided not to lean. The day asked for preparation. I wore a dress I could run in, not because I intended to, but because knowing I could made the air more honest. I tied my hair back so that wind would have to work for it. I tucked the mirror into my bag as if it were a small, vain animal. I took Muriel's diary and did not apologize to her portrait for stealing it. Cassian appeared at noon, with rain cleaned from his edges. He studied me without flair, the way a pilot studies weather. "You look ready to be impolite," he said. "Always," I said, It keeps me out of worse trouble." He glanced at the map, which had grown overnight like ivy. "Any changes?" "Only to me," I said. "And to me," he said, so quietly I could pretend I hadn't heard it if that made anything easier. We worked like two professionals who have been asked to dress for a funeral without being told whose. He called two men whose silence he trusted and told them to find a document from a century ago that did not want to be found. I catalogued the staff's recollections of the first and second storms, the odd sounds, the misplaced brooches, the sharpened knives, the doors that changed their minds about where they had been yesterday. We became practical as a way of not touching the thing we would have to touch. At 4, Anke brought us tea and a look that recognized the possession of future hours. "The 3rd will be Monday," she said, "or Tuesday if it's feeling vain." "Monday," I said, before I could stop myself. "Because?" "Because it's rude," I said, and felt absurd. "And because this house was built to believe that business happens on Tuesdays." Cassian's mouth twitched. "Monday," he agreed. "We prepare for Monday." "And if the wind demands a name you won't say in front of me?" he asked me later, as we stood in the portrait hall and let the ancestors think what they liked. "I'll say it anyway," I said, "because the house will be listening, and I prefer my dignity to be plural." He laughed. It was not kind, it was honest. "Plural dignity," he said. "Teach me." "I can," I said. And then we were both very still. He reached for my hand, not to take it, only to see how close he could come before both of us flinched or burned. We didn't. The distance was deliberate. The want was not. "After," he said. "If there is an after." "There will be," I said. "It's what libraries are for." "And what are houses for?" he asked. "To remember more than is good for them," I said. "And to charge admission." He turned my palm up, not touching, reading. "And what are we for?" "Spending," I said, "until we refuse." We looked, because we have always been the only animals that know looking is an event. The corridor held its breath, old lungs showing off. Muriel, in the frame to our right, stared as if suspecting she had started a game she would not live to finish. "Tell me the word," Cassian said suddenly, voice slender with something he rarely permitted. "The wind's name." "Say please," I said, before I could ruin everything by giving him what he asked without price. He smiled, not a performance, the first honest one I had seen. Brief, a little shamefaced, all admission and no defense. "Please." I leaned, my mouth near his ear. The syllables stung my tongue on the way out. They thrilled the air on the way in. He inhaled as though the word had weight. The hair along my arms lectured me about caution, and I ruined the lecture by wanting to brush against him. "You're sure," he said, very low. "You would not prefer to become weather with me instead of for me?" The sentence was a trap and a bridge. I stepped onto the latter, if only because I wanted the former later. "Ask me again on Tuesday," I said. He nodded, accepting the terms, accepting me, or accepting what wanting me did to his arithmetic. "Tuesday," he said. The second storm had emptied itself. The house had tasted the quiet that comes before a third. The week began, thin and radiant, and full of a terror that felt like hope, shaved down to its necessary nerve. That night, I returned to the handleless door alone. I knocked with the houseless courtesy of someone who knows that everything belongs to someone else. The violin had nothing to say. Ardan did. He accepted my 7 days with a merchant's grace. He warned me that winds do not distinguish between guilt and invitation. He asked for Muriel's diary and opened it to the place where I had hidden my own letter without pretending surprise. "You flatter ink," he said, turning the pages with absent care. "It will ask for more." "It can have the truth," I said. "It cannot have me." "You just promised it," he said, amused. "I promised a week," I said. "I keep my units precise." He smiled as if I were a knife he might one day enjoy owning. "Until Monday, librarian." "Until Monday," I said. In my room I undressed as if there were witnesses there were. There are always in old houses, and slept a longer sleep, the kind that arrives not because you have earned it, but because you have paid for it in advance with nerve. In it, the wind wore many faces, mine, Muriel's, Ardan's, and once, for a flash that left me hot and then embarrassed, Cassian's. The dream taught me nothing, except that I was not immune to narrative. It was an insult I accepted. Morning again. The lake played coin toss with light and swallowed it in measured gulps. The staff moved in the choreography that keeps the rich from noticing the physics of their own lives. I ate, I read, I mapped, I wrote a note for cook, praising her soup, so she would know I was a woman who wrote thank yous even to people who were not the objects of her strategy. She sent up a slice of something with lemon that cut my mouth and set it straight. The week drew itself in with little ticks on the mantel clock and long inhales in the vents, in my pockets, a mirror with a word trapped behind it. In my mind, a map that kept adding doors. By Sunday evening, I had learned the house's exact count of floorboards that complain and the pitch of the third stair on the west back steps. I had learned that Anke sleeps speared by moonlight and does not move for hours. I had learned that Cassian reads contracts with a tenderness he ought to reserve for people, and that he turns pages with his thumb as if it were a promise. We met in the library at 10. We did not sit. We stood with the portrait between us like a sponsor or a dare. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," I confirmed. "Have you ever—" He stopped. "Uncommon." "What?" He shook his head and laughed at himself, a sound like a guilty hinge. "Never mind, foolish. Ask," I said. "Or you'll take the question into the room with you, and it will give your answers bad posture." He drew a breath. "Have you ever loved someone you wanted to protect from the parts of you that make you valuable?" "Yes," I said. "He left on a train that never arrived." "And you?" "And I learned the names of the winds," I said, "because the truth needed a coat." He considered me with that accountant's intensity. Everything to be added, nothing to be forgiven yet. "I am not a man who asks for softness," he said. "I am not a woman who mistakes softness for weakness," I said. He closed the distance he had left me the night before, close enough to count the lines at the corners of his gaze where restraint had written its poems. He did not touch me. We breathed. History watched. "Tuesday," he said again. The word a bridge, a prayer, a calculated risk. "Tuesday," I repeated, because the wind likes the third time. We parted not with a kiss, but with an inventory, eyes, mouth, throat, hands, because looking is a currency, and we had learned to spend it carefully. In the corridor, Muriel's painted face softened by less than a degree, a change so small it could have been rain. Outside, the lake rehearsed its temper. The weather app on Cassian's phone lied beautifully about percentages. The house checked itself in every mirror and decided it looked adequately haunted. The third storm would wear a familiar face. By then, I had learned how to say its name without bleeding. By then, I had learned which of us would bend. Chapter 4. The arithmetic of doors. Monday entered like a witness who had practiced their story too often. It arrived in a clean shirt, hair slicked over what it didn't wish to admit, hands folded as if they knew where every knife had been put away. The light over the lake was ordinary on purpose. The sky suggested errand lists and polite handshakes. The wind, having learned its name, pretended not to know me. The house, however, could not help itself. It woke with the irritability of a young god. The boards muttered in the corridors. The curtains breathed as if someone were sleeping behind them. The staircases, those armatures of decision, flexed. Cook sent coffee strong enough to discourage lying, and a plate of buckwheat cakes that tasted like regret with an excellent afterlife. Anke stood in my doorway and did not look at me, which is an intimacy you can only manage with people you trust with your wrists. "If you run," she said, "run down, never up," I said. "The 6th floor will try to be generous," she added. "Don't mistake it." "Noted," I said, and she nodded in the particular way people do when they are checking that you own your breath. Cassian did not come until 9. He wore gray, the color of contracts that will stand, and storms that haven't decided whether they're merciful. He had shaved with the exactitude of a man who expected to be looked at by his ancestors and by something that would not sign its name. He smelled faintly of cedar and the expensive distance money buys from other people's choices. "Monday," he said. "Tuesday's impatient cousin," I replied. We stood at the desk that had become our altar. Muriel's portrait hung on the far wall, as if she had been nailed there to prevent a relapse into mischief. The map, my map, spread between us with its arrows and refusals, a patient treason. I picked up the mirror. It didn't feel heavier. It felt awake. "Here," he said, and pushed across the desk a folder so unremarkable it reminded me of the men who leave wives when the youngest child turns 8. Inside, a deed, a letter, an addendum. Dates from the year the trains decided the city was no longer worth all their time. "What am I looking at?" I asked, though I could taste it already. The iron of obligation, the sugar of what seemed like reprieve, the peat of old promises. "My mother's bargain," he said, without flourish, after my aunt fell. The letter was in his mother's hand, neat, schoolmistress plain, the obsessive loops of a woman who had taught herself that love was a matter of posture. "Dear sir," it began, and I wondered if the sir was a judge, a banker, a gentleman who lent weather in exchange for the right to arrive at funerals uninvited. It was none of those. It was a letter to Muriel. I read. It was not clever. It was not cruel. It was the kind of letter you write when grief has taken the gloss off your vanity and your house off its hinges. Sister, not by blood, but by the offense of the same balcony. You borrowed us time. I hate you for it, and I thank you. He will come again. I have kept the brooch. I have thrown it away. It returns like a woman who knows where she lives. I have a son whose hands are too careful for the world we are in. I have put his name in the ledger. Forgive me. Forgive me. The 3rd storm is mine, if I can trick the wind. If I cannot, it will be his. Below, the addendum in another hand, a notary who signed as if the pen embarrassed him. A deed, nothing obvious, transferring the right to lease 3 parcels of riverfront during flood years to a holding company that, tracing the alias, resolved to a single name, Arden Kestrel. The room leaned. I did not. She offered him what? Water rights? Time rights, Cassian said. He had not sat. He had learned where to put his weight in this house. During floods, When the city's rules loosen, he could more. He could move goods others could not. He could sell what was temporarily more valuable because everyone else had mistaken a day for forever. And in return, breathing room, he said, for our debts, for our servants' patience, for the way grief rots a roof and then drips into beds. And the third storm? Seems, he said, and it was the first time I had heard him choose a small word and mean it, to have been left as a floating clause. She tried to pay with herself, I said softly. She failed. She nominated you. He did not flinch. He read the letter again, but he was not reading handwriting. He was reading his mother's jaw, the line it had made when she'd signed a thing that wanted his throat. I told myself for a decade that my mother's severity was a kind of love, he said. Today, I will give myself the luxury of admitting it was a kind of fear. She handed me to the wind because she believed I knew the names of doors. And do you? I asked, and it was not flippant. I know how to close them, he said. I am less practiced at opening them in ways that won't drown anyone. We did not touch. We let ink be our intimacy. He set the folder aside with ceremony appropriate to betrayal that had worn perfume. I slid the mirror into the space between us until the silver drank the room. We have the deed, I said. We have the ledger. We have the diary. We have a word the wind will answer to. We have... I stopped, because naming everything you have is an invitation to be robbed. We have an hour, he finished, and a house that wants theater. At 10, clouds rehearsed. The wind lifted its skirts and showed us the whites of its knees. The lake reminded the shore what it had been paid to forget. Staff moved through halls with the grace of people who have learned to lay down a room like a good card. Anke put stakes in doors that liked to swing, weights on tables that liked to glide, a rosary in her pocket because unused words sometimes deserved to be held. Cook knotted her apron with the intention of refusing to weep. Soup on the stove, she told me, in case anyone is miraculous. Miracles eat? I asked, because it is polite to joke when people are making offerings you cannot afford. They should, she said. And then, as if she'd remembered a recipe that had once saved a life, if you hear the kettles hiss together, it's starting. Go where you decided to be brave. Where I decided to be brave was not a room. It was a line between rooms, the topmost landing with the handleless door to one side, and the corridor to the balcony unfurling like an arm to the other. A place where the house could not claim me entirely without showing its hand. A place where a librarian could perform as a priest without lying too loudly to herself. At 10:30, the chimneys sang a scale. At 10:40, the windows breathed in all at once, and I tasted iron. At 10:50, the portraits whispered the dignity of their frames. At 10:55, I thought briefly of the bakery 3 neighborhoods away and the custards that must be cooling. Yellow has second chances. At 11, the house took a step toward us. The first thunder was shy. The second remembered itself. The third arrived like a judge whose hat has been stolen and who intends to sentence someone for it anyway. Rain took the roof in its excellent hands. Cassian came to me as if heat can choose whom it warms. He did not attempt to smile. Men in certain families do not grin when they intend to pay. He offered his arm in the formal way men have invented for moments when touching is not the point and still matters. Ready? He asked. No, I said. Yes. He looked at the mirror. I looked at his throat. Both of us looked away. Then proceed, he said, and there it was again, that word that has condemned more good intentions than any sin. I stood before the door. The house had not unlocked it. It had made my palms damp with the idea of it. Arden's room was listening, an animal pretending to be asleep so it can enjoy its surprise. I lifted the mirror. I spoke the word the wind liked to hear its name dressed in. It came. It is difficult to write what air does when it decides to be seen. The mirror did not cloud, the glass thinned, as if light had become a sheet and someone with beautiful hands were pulling it tight. My reflection drew back, unwilling. The Silva opened its throat. The wind that knew my name wore a face I would not choose for my enemy. It was mine. Not precisely. No one recognizes themselves until a photograph makes a fool of their vanity. It was me without sleep, and with all the pages I had read layered behind my eyes like shields. It was me with my mother's mouth on a night she had agreed to believe the trains were on time. It was me carrying the smell of cinnamon and tobacco and rosin, as if those three had agreed to help me abandon dignity. It looked at me and raised an eyebrow that was more amused than forgiving. "Elara," the wind said. It did not move its mouth. Wind is not a person. The sound was the coo of chimneys and the slap of rain off stone and the hiss kettles make when a cook's back is turned, arranged as a voice because we needed it. "Witness," I said, and was horrified to hear the devoutness that had hidden in the soles of my feet climb into my voice. "We call you to call us to account, do not." "Always calling," the wind sighed. "You are a library with knees." It turned its face toward Cassian. He did not flinch. Of course he didn't. He bowed, crisp as a covenant. The mirror reflected him twice, once as himself, once as a man wedded to the idea of himself. "Name," I said. "Which?" the wind asked, as if there could be more than one command. "The one you want me to say," I said, and the wind smiled because I had admitted to being taught. I said it. The syllables hurt less. They revealed more. The house inhaled, delighted. The door unlatched itself like a mouth. Arden did not appear in full. The room darkened in the mirror and turned toward the landing, and where there had been nothing there was a man leaning against absence like a railing he alone trusted. He had not grown older. He had not grown kinder. He wore a coat that had learned disrepute without dirt. His eyes went to the wind as if it were a lover who owed him a letter. "Third storm," he said. "Not to me and not to Cassian, to the language. We are in the clause." He looked at Cassian then as if at an invoice. "You are more handsome than your father," he said, less forgiving. "My father forgave weather," Cassian said. "I am not that pious." "Ham Reed, forgive me," Arden murmured honeyed cruelty, "but it is not the weather asking." "No," Cassian said. "It is a man who made himself a door and then asked women to pay his toll." I recognized the way Arden smiled. Men wear it when they find themselves arguing with someone willing to bleed within the first 3 sentences. "Shall we itemize?" he asked. "It seems you like ledgers." "Muriel's bargain," I said, because letting men duel over women while the house listened felt like the sort of theater that trains themselves away from cities for her brother's debt, her shrewder doubt. Your signature that taught Penn's shame, the reprieve that bought the family 3 winters, the aunt who leaned too close to the wrong edge, the mother who signed her son with a hand that hadn't earned the ink, the deed that moved rights like a bad marriage, and the clause floating, yes, that named the third storm, a collector with a familiar face. Arden considered me as if I had poured him a drink he could not refuse because it was correct. And What payment do you propose? Reassignment, I said. It should have been hers. She offered it. She failed. She paid in grotesque increments. It should not be his. He never signed. His mother signed him, Ardan observed. Mothers outweigh ink. Not in any language that will survive this house, I said. Not with a witness. Aid shores. The wind, my wind, arced its reflection toward Ardan, then toward Cassian, tasting their names. The glass hummed. The house leaned. The chimneys sang a different note. You like justice, Ardan said to me. It was not an accusation. It was a problem he could solve. Do you like mercy? Only when it arrives late and doesn't pretend to be otherwise, I said. Do you like women who mistake you for the river because you are dressed like it? He laughed, delighted, and the landing warmed by a fraction. Very much. Good, I said. Then let's negotiate with the vanity you brought. Be careful. Cassian murmured the sort of caution that good men offer as if it were apology. Always, I lied. Ardan tilted his head. You're weak, he said. I can taste the shape of it. You borrowed well. You accepted. I returned. I like to see who will spend, he said. It tells me who will suffer prettily. Then here is my proposal. You take the storm from the house, I said. You release the clause. You return the deed to the river because it never belonged to any of us. In exchange, you take what I promised, my week, all of it, at once. Cassian's breath made a decision between his ribs. Elara, quiet, I said, not cruelly. Carefully. This part is mine. He is, Ardan observed me like a luthier observes wood. For warp, for sap, for the likelihood that I would sing if asked too often. All at once? Yes. You will not get it back, he said. And he said it with a kindness so alien to his mouth I nearly made a mistake and thanked him. I know. He stepped closer. No footsteps. No pressure on the boards. He wore the gravity of men who have stopped pretending their appetites are small. Then let me be plain, he said, and he turned to Cassian without leaving my gaze. If I take her weak now, she will lose it. In her body age where there should not be, in her memory holes where a morning used to be, in her future, a shift that will feel like a staircase counting wrong. You will watch her pay. You will not be asked to admire it. You will not be asked to help. The mirror tilted with my hands. The wind's face mine regarded me as if asking whether I had always intended to be this person. I felt all the stubbornness that had kept me reading through hunger and sitting on trains through winter rise like bread that refuses to obey anyone but heat. I understand, I said. And you think it is worth it, he said, nearly curious. I think it is mine, I said. And with those 4 words, I discovered a savagery in myself that had been waiting for a ritual to wear. He bowed then, the smallest concession a man like that will make to a woman who insists on writing her throat into the contract. Very well, he said. The week for the storm, the deed for the door, the clause returned to the mouth that made it. Signed, I said, and the mirror swallowed the word like a seal pressed into wax. Not yet, Ardan said. Witness. We turned the glass. The wind looked between us, taking its time because wind loves to. It tasted the name again. It licked its reflection along the seam of the door. It slipped through the handleless gap and returned with a piece of dark no object, a temperature, and laid it against my wrist. Cold, bright, mine. Done, the wind said, and every window in the house moaned as if admitting they had watched something indecent and loved it. Ardan reached. He did not touch me. He made the shape of a hand closing around a thing the size of an apple and pulled. I felt it, a week leaving me, not days peeling off a calendar, more like music in reverse. The breakfasts I had not yet eaten became memory without history. The kisses I had not yet kissed took their place beside childhood winters, and the time the librarian who trained me died with her catalogue incomplete, and I wept into a sleeve I was ashamed to own. I staggered. Cassian's hand moved, stopped. He mastered the instinct because if he finished it, it would be pity, and this was not a room that would forgive him for that. It took less than a minute. It took a century. Elegant, Ardan murmured when I lifted my head. I wish you had been born when duels were legal. I duel on paper, I said, and my voice was raw, and I allowed it. You accept? He nodded to the mirror, not to me. Witness? Witness. The wind sighed, pleased to have been asked, and so recorded. Ardan turned to Cassian with a little bow so wickedly courteous I wanted to slap his mouth with a hymn. You live, he said. Tonight. Oh no, I have to a. I would have. Anyway, Cassian said softly, which was the sort of flippancy good men offer when they will not admit to how close an edge has licked their heel. Ardan's mouth crooked. We shall see, master. He glanced at me. Librarian, of all the rooms in this house, you are the one I like best. Do not disappoint me by dying for symbolic reasons. Go, I said. He went, not through the door. The room exhaled him. The landing cooled. The mirror returned me to myself, altered by the smallest degrees that only clocks and women who count their breaths will notice. The wind lingered, then tilted its face in a gesture I would not have thought possible if I had not been living in a house that taught paintings to move. It looked at Cassian, it looked at me. It smiled without malice, as if we were both students in a lesson too old for blackboards. Careful, it said. The balcony is vain. Noted, I said, and the mirror darkened into ordinary silver, and ordinary is an insult I will never throw at a reflective surface again. For a moment we were three beings, and then two, and then only ourselves. The house shifted its weight like a satisfied cat. Cassian moved this time all the way. He reached me, not my face, my wrist, where the cold had lain its claim. His fingers did not cover the mark. They hovered around it, humbly, the way those who have not earned a relic none the less desire its permission. What did it take? He asked. A week, I said. 7 breakfasts, a handful of afternoons, 1 clean hour in a bookstore I would have liked very much. A sleep I might have remembered fondly. He closed his eyes and opened them again with discipline. I would have given you a dozen such hours, he said, and it was the kindest thing anyone had said to me in a decade, and it was useless and therefore perfect. You didn't have them, I said, and if you did, they'd taste of debt. Aura and come no. Everything does, he said, without self-pity, even kindness. The storm, as if offended at being partially upstaged, redoubled. Rain pressed its palms against the windows. The chimneys sang a descant in a key only old houses and women who have read too long can hear. Something down the corridor thumped. A chair making the decision, a door changing its mind, a portrait taking offense. Come, I said. We aren't finished. We moved as people do after a ritual, lighter and heavier, more ourselves and less, down the landing toward the balcony, because the wind had told the truth and I intended to insult it by pretending I had not heard. The corridor seemed longer. Houses do this when they want you to spend what you have just acquired. Halfway there, Muriel's portrait looked out from a wall where it hadn't been 5 minutes ago. She wore the brooch. It shone like a coin in the mouth of a gambler. Her gaze, once simply unsmiling, had grown almost sorry. "Don't," Cassian murmured. "Don't what?" "Forgive her before the house does," he said. "It will sulk." "I have no plans to forgive anyone," I said. "I have plans to be accurate." On the balcony, the wind had its small party. The rail gleamed with water. The lawn performed the wet obedience gardens learn in old cities. The drop looked kind. Drops often do. I placed my palms on the stone and made them stay. Cassian stood a step behind, close enough to catch me if catching were a thing we would do to each other and not resent. "Witness," I said to the air. The air, gracious, lifted my hair off my neck and let it fall back without cruelty. Below, on the lawn, something moved. If this were a different narrative, it would have been a man in a coat or the ghost of one. If this were a cautionary tale, it would have been the brooch rolling like a coin toward a drain. It was neither. It was water, not the lake. The groundwater, risen with the rain, finding old conduits under the lawn, the same conduits the deed had concerned itself with. It slid toward the foundation like a thought remembered too late. "The rights," I said. "He used them. The tunnels, the moorings, they're still there." "And the house," Cassian said, understanding at the same pace my ribs did, "remembers the door is also a drain. Water found a seam I did not know." The house shivered. Somewhere, a latch gave. The 6th floor exhaled a dream it had been saving. Ardan had accepted my week. The clause was gone. The deed would be river again. But the house was a collector in its own right. It had a debt to the weather, and weather likes to be paid in movement. "Down," Anke had said. "Down," I told Cassian. And we did not run. We learned what walking does when it has to pretend to be faster. Past the portrait hall, where ancestors wrung their hands with dignity, past the winter parlor, which had the decency to let the fire hiss out, down the back stair, where servants had taught each riser the rhythm of fear. The basement corridor was already damp. Stone had begun to sweat. At the bricked-over window, mortar wept. "The room," I said. We reached it as it unlidded itself. Not from the door, from below. The water came through a seam I would have sworn ironed shut a century ago. It rose with purpose, clear and cold and impolite. On the wall, Muriel's portrait remained hung. Still, the brooch in paint pale as a small moon. "It wants the painting," Cassian said, and though it was absurd, I believed him. "Of course it does," I said. "It always wanted to move. Now it intends to learn to swim." The letters, my river of them, were on the table in their bruise ribbon. I lunged. Cassian had already stripped the bookcase of anything that would dissolve into apologies, and we stacked on the desk what we could save. We lifted carpet as far as pride allowed. We watched the water test the legs of furniture like a lover who cannot decide what he wants to bruise. "Leave the portrait," Cassian said. "Why?" I demanded, though I had already divided the world into what we would carry and what we would let drown. "It's the house's," he said. "It has to pay something. Let it be this." The water licked my boots. Cold climbed my ankles. I thought of my week. I am not a woman who forgets the price she paid. I thought of Muriel, who had stolen time like a cake and found it crumbed her lips when she tried to eat it in the dark. I thought of Ardan, who would play violin to any drowning and call it accompaniment. I thought of the wind, which would not forgive us for every time we had called it and pretended not to hear its answers. "All right," I said. "We leave her." We stepped back. The water swelled. The portrait did not flinch. The woman in it had learned to lean. The brooch took on a trick of light that made it look briefly, only briefly, as if it had unhooked itself and hovered. The house purred. And by purr I mean made the noise that buildings make when they decide to accept consequence. We waited. There is a holiness to watching the thing you cannot save be taken. We did it as well as anyone can. When the water reached the bottom of the frame, the painting sighed canvas, giving in the damp, and lifted. Not up, out. It floated itself free like a confession. It turned, so Muriel faced the ceiling, as if unwilling, even in ritual, to watch. The house groaned, the water shouldered. The painting slipped through the seam the deed had once leased to men with narrow faces and profitable ethics. It went where water goes. "The brooch," Cassian said, hoarse, as if a coin had been swallowed where his voice should be. "Do you see?" "I see," I said, "and I did, and I will do the indecent thing now of confessing I was glad." We stood in ankle water. We stood in decision. The house had paid something that had belonged to it. Ardan had taken what I owed. The wind had been thanked. And in the slippery arithmetic of dark rooms and old rage, a number shifted its posture. Cassian put his hand on the doorframe and bowed his head. It was not prayer, and it was not surrender. It was the way a man admits that a structure he has mastered intends to live without his permission. "Tuesday," he said. We said Tuesday. We did, I said, and the cold climbed my calves, and it was good for me. And we will keep our word. We sloshed backward into the corridor, up into air where floors still believed in their boundaries. Anke met us with towels and a look that made a ledger of our faces. Cook shouted from the stairs that the kettles had stopped hissing, which is not the same as peace but will do for soup. Above, the chimneys did a last show-off song and quieted. The house set itself down. The storm went elsewhere, to insult other roofs. Night dropped. Not silence the sound of mop buckets and muttered saints and the rhythmic argument of a wet carpet with a strong back. We helped as rich people do when they remember their hands were not meant only for signatures. We lifted, we carried, we praised, we apologized to furniture as if it had ears. When it was done enough to sleep badly, Cassian and I went to the library because there is nowhere else to go when a house has emptied itself of its drama and left you full of yours. He closed the door with care. He did not go to the desk. He went to the window, wet black pane greeting lake and city and the exhausted moon. He put his hand against it as if to test whether glass can forgive. I stood with the mirror in my pocket and my new gaps in my days and the ache in my ribs where a week had been evicted without anesthesia. "Tell me where you are," he said, facing the window. "In a house that has decided not to eat you yet," I said. "And you?" "Short," I said, and laughed, and the laugh frightened me with its truth. "Less time than I had this morning. More nerve than I deserve." He turned. "You paid," he said, as if we were beginning, not summarizing. "We both did," I said, "but I had exact change." He crossed the room with the deliberateness of a lawyer walking into a church he has won a case against. He stopped in front of me and did not reach, and everything that followed will belong to the next chapter, the one in which weather has surrendered and people have to decide whether to. He breathed my name. "Elara." "Cassian," I answered. "The house," he said, with a glance that included the door, the window, the portraits, and the ghost of a violin, "is tired." I am not, I lied. You will be, he said. Tomorrow. Tuesday, I corrected, and we both smiled like thieves. Stay, he said. Not the plea he might have made if he had allowed himself youth, not the command he could have made if he wanted to be his mother. Stay where I can see you. I am not a portrait, I said. I know, he said. That is why I am asking. I looked at his mouth. I looked at the mirror. I looked at my hands, which smelled of old wood and clean water, and the very particular grief of letting the right thing go into the wrong darkness. Tonight, I said, I'll stay. I slept on a chaise in the library because beds ask you to trust you will wake in them, and I was not yet ready to forgive furniture its optimism. The house dreamed softly. The lake remembered a portrait. The wind said my name once, in the tone of an aunt who has decided to approve of your scandal after all. And in the space between the thunder we had used and the quiet we had earned, something else opened its eyes. It was not the house. It was a rumor in the city, a man with new time on his hands and old appetites in his pockets, a piece of water learning to walk. The deed had returned to the river. The river is not famous for gratitude, but it loves a bargain. It remembers what is owed. Tuesday would arrive, and we had not yet decided what to do with it. Chapter 5. Tuesday, in which the river keeps a promise. Tuesday woke with sore feet. It limped in, middle-aged, unimpressed with our theatrics. The lake lay down like a dog that had decided to love no one again. The sky washed its face and declared a banal blue. The house wore the hangover of a singer who had hit every note and remembered every one of them. I woke on the chaise with a stiffness that belonged to an older woman, a week older in the bones, a week emptier in the places where plans usually bloom. The library's light was the color of repentance. On the desk, my map waited. My handwriting had grown minutely more disciplined, as if the hours I had given up had come back as etiquette. The first thing that happened was domestic and therefore occult. Cook appeared in the doorway with a cloth-wrapped package, her mouth pressed tight around a joke she had not consented to tell. "You'll want to see this," she said, laying it on the desk. "The brooch," I said before she opened it. I could taste the metal in my teeth. A small moon the river had rolled on its tongue and decided to return to the unworthy. She unfolded the cloth. Wet, delicate as a wound, the circle gleamed. Not silver, something older or more stubborn, a metal that preferred to be believed in. Milk-bright, grave. I could see how it would have shone at Muriel's throat, making jewelry of defiance. Water beaded on its surface without adhering. It had traveled. It had learned ship's ways. "Where did you find it?" I asked, though I already knew. "In the bread box," Cook said, and the corners of her mouth surrendered. It waited until I had turned my back. "It is a guest with manners." "Don't eat from the loaf it's slept under," Anke called from the corridor, and Cook rolled her eyes in a manner that implied she resented having her superstitions preempted. I reached. The brooch was cold in the expectant way of things about to write their names on you. I held it in my palm and felt nothing, and then everything, a pressure in the wrist where the wind had laid its cold, a seam running from that place to my throat, the sense of a story tipping forward to see whether I would rescue it or throw it back into the water. "Pin it," Cook said, unexpectedly tender. "Someone should. It's tired of being an idea." "Where?" I asked. They both looked at my throat. I thought of Muriel, her ankles on the wrong side of the balcony, the letters like weapons disguised as prayers, the arrogance and the apology braided so tight you could wear them as a chain. I thought of the house and its dreams, Ardan and his debt with manners, Cassian and the particular way he had said please. No, I said, and the word was not refusal, it was arithmetic, not me. I carried the brooch to the window. The lake gave nothing away. It held its breath like a man about to decide whether to be cruel. I pinned the brooch to the curtain just at the edge, where light and shadow exchange gossip. The metal lay there with the dignity jewelry takes on when it stops pretending to flatter and starts deciding what it will do with the room. The house sighed. Not relief, acknowledgement. A new balance had installed itself in the air. Coffee? Cook said, already pouring. And she groped for cheerfulness and produced a bun with jewels of candied peel. Consolation prize for surviving a bargain. Thank you, I said, and the thanks had more weight than the bun. Gratitude is engineered out of debts and sweetness. Anke hovered with a plate and then fitted herself to the doorway as if it were a frame she intended to practice standing inside. He's been up since before the light, she said. Walked the perimeter, counted the windows. We are on 27. He says there are 29. He is wrong. The house is teasing him. I'll go, I said. I found Cassian on the east side of the garden, hair damp from a brush with the air, shirt sleeves rolled as if he meant to debate blame with roses. He did not wear a coat, and his forearms were a lesson in attention, efficient tendons, pale marks of a life that favored intelligence over violence and yet had acquired evidence of both. 2 windows have decided they belong to yesterday, he said, without turning. I'm trying to talk them out of it. You won't, I said. Tuesday does not brook nostalgia. He smiled sideways. Tuesday has a librarian now. Only on loan, I said. I have debts. I paid one last night. I owe myself some rudeness. He faced me then. He looked better in the morning. Most men do because the night's privacy has not yet asked them to betray anything. He studied me, not hungrily, not clinically, accurately. Where did you put it? I tilted my head toward the library, where it can see without deciding. Good, he said, and I almost hated him for agreeing with me. We walked. There is a pleasure to strolling a house and its gardens with a person you have saved. It is not noble. It is greedy. The air participates, softer at the edges, like a rumor that has been proven true and therefore calmed. We passed the folly, the hedges performing obedience, the piece of lawn that would remember drowning and therefore grow arrogant. We arrived at the low wall over the drop to the lake. We did not lean. My mother, he said, once told me that the only kindness money can do a person is buy them privacy for their grief, that everything else is theater, and most of that is borrowed. Was she right? She was right, and she was cruel, he said. The combination is hereditary. Her letter was not, I said. It was helplessness written as if it could pass for policy. Bias, I know, he said, and the admission cost him and returned something to him simultaneously. You have paid. I have not truly. I am good at moving money to where it will do the least harm. I am less good at telling the truth when there is no contract to sign. I thought of the rumor I had sensed. Raising its head in the city, the deed returned to the river, the tunnel's memory waking. Men who become water when profit introduces them to the right darkness. Then do it, I said. Tell the truth. Write it down even if no one asked you to. People like us need paper to believe ourselves. He made a small, grieved noise that might have been a laugh. What truth should I start with? And That you wanted to live, I said. That you were frightened. That you permitted something you didn't understand to take something from someone you didn't yet know how to protect. He took that like medicine, the face that contains the grimace and earns the cure. Yes, he said. He looked toward the water and I followed his gaze. A small black shape skimmed the surface, bird or trash or omen. We let it be. I wanted to say something light to rescue the morning from portent. I have learned, reluctantly, that lightness is a kind of lie when used improperly. I said nothing. It was the right choice. The quiet deepened, grew muscular, made us both taller. We returned inside. The house had done that thing old houses do when they are benevolent. It had chosen not to squeak. People moved in it with the new courtesy of the almost tired. Anke carried towels past like small, upright flags of surrender. Somewhere, someone sang under their breath a hymn that had learned to flirt. Muriel's diary lay open where I had left it. The brooch at the window caught the light as if demonstrating a theorem. I took my map and crossed out an arrow. It felt good, the way crossing out sometimes does when it does not come from defeat but from having finally earned the right not to be pursued by certain pasts. Before noon, the city sent emissaries. Not the police, not yet. Men with clipboards and the authority to speak to walls, engineers, water and power, permits. Their conversation with Cassian took place in a long room with a table that could seat a jury and had often wished to. I sat in, not because I was required, but because librarians prefer to be present when others misfile the truth. The storm overwhelmed a section of the old culvert, said a man with a face like a faucet, functional, disinterested in romance. We're tracing ownership of the rivulet. Retired rights, Cassian said. It was the first lie he told, and he did it well. Nothing is retired, the engineer said. It is merely waiting for paperwork. I slid a photocopy across the table. The deed that had been the river's business during flood years, with Ardan Kestrel's name now functioning as a note in a song that had ceased to be played. The rights reverted. The storm returned what it borrowed. The house has paid. The engineer woman, sharp, impatient with men who bound their sentences in suits, tapped the paper. This is from yesterday. I need the one from 13 years ago, when the city widened the sluices and decided to pretend they were only for rain. Check the East records, I said. Third drawer from the bottom. The folder misfiled under civic surplus. You will have to forgive the annotation. Someone in my profession left the city for a private collection and took her handwriting with her. And she looked at me as if she would not, and then did, and then nodded, unwillingly grateful. Who are you? She asked. A librarian, I said. Those, she muttered, are the only saints who send us to the right hell. They left with copies and promises to return with fines dressed as congratulations. Cassian dropped into a chair and exhaled so deeply the room considered dimming a lamp in sympathy. If I had not asked you to stay, he said, the house would have eaten a different person. If you had not asked, I said, I would have come anyway. I surprised myself with the truth and then forgave myself for it. I like debts, I can read. He looked at my hands, then at my mouth, then at the brooch at the curtain, and then away precisely when he should. We have learned the names of winds, he said. The house has learned to speak without gossiping. Ardan has learned to take a gift and leave something useful in return. What did he leave? I asked. He pointed wordlessly at the diary. I crossed to it, palms ridiculous with a new tremor, and found, slipped between two pages, like an admission between two lies, a scrap in Ardan's hand. It was not elegant. It had been torn from something and folded with anger into tidiness. You lent me a week. I could not return it. I returned something else. The second line. A word. Not the wind's name, a name I did not know I had been waiting for. Muriel, her middle name. Ilara. I looked up. Cassian was watching me with the sort of attention a man gives when he is not watching to win anything. "What does it mean?" he asked. "It means," I said slowly, "that the portrait was not the only object he wanted to deliver. It means the house will no longer lie about her because it knows how to call her. It means," I swallowed the idea as if it were too new to be eaten without scalding. "It means when we speak to our dead, we will not have to sound like men negotiating." And he made a sound I had not learned the taxonomy for, yet pleasure with a bruise. "Say it," he asked. I did. The syllables thinned the air and then sweetened it. The portraits along the hall shifted their little weight of varnish. The curtains smoothed the tiny disarray the brooch created. The house returned a word of its own, mine. At 2, I walked to the bridge over the river because librarians are known for accuracy, and my body needed to practice it in daylight. The river moral was not ashamed. It had never been. It wore sunlight the way some women wear shame, as if it belongs to them and they dare you to say otherwise. I stood where I had stood the night I met him. The man with the dangerous coat that taught me the difference between public and private gravity, and I looked over the balustrade's gap. My reflection did not accuse me. It looked older by a week and less afraid to agree to fear. I thought of my 6th-floor apartment and the bakery's hours and the chalk scrawl that woke me when saints refused. I could go back and carry ordinary like a sacrament. I could pack and put my furniture in an arrangement that taught my nights humility. I could wear my skill modestly and let my body never again make a bargain my mind would have to atone for. I did not choose yet. At dusk, he came to the library. He did not knock. The house told him I would not mind. He wore a shirt without a tie. He had emptied his pockets beforehand. Men declare their intentions with accessories. I have learned to read that alphabet. "Close the door," he said. "You're fond of that line," I said. "It keeps the house out of my sentences," he said. "I will allow many elders. I will not allow this one to grade me." I closed it. The latch clicked with the little pleasure old mechanisms feel when they are included. We were alone. "You have something you want to say," I said, because he had the look men get when they have pushed a boulder up a hill of mouth and decided to let it roll. "Yes?" He stepped toward me, then another. I did not move backward because I would have regretted it forever even if it had saved me. He stopped close enough that I could have counted the breaths between us if I had been willing to spend them. "I am a man who keeps ledgers," he said. "I am also a man who has kept himself for so long that generosity feels like theft. I don't want to be that with you." "All right," I said. "You gave up a week," he said. "No one has ever given me anything I cannot repay with money. I don't have a currency that can match it. I want to ask for another thing I cannot repay." There it was, the trap, the bridge, the balcony's lesson without the drop. I lifted my chin so the brooch I did not wear could see my throat's courage. "Ask," I said. "Stay," he said. "Not as a portrait, not as an employee, not as a priest, as a woman whose hand I will not hold over edges unless she drags me there herself." I considered saying yes while saying no and disliking myself forever for the arithmetic that resulted. I considered saying no while wanting yes and building a shrine to honesty out of that refusal. I did what librarians do best. I cataloged the available answers and took the one that had not yet injured anyone. I will stay, I said, until I am not curious any more. His had me. He laughed then, startled and delighted, and the sound made the house lift its eyebrows in a way portraits would have imitated if permission had been included in the frame. "You're cruel," he said. "I'm careful," I said. "You mistake one for the other because you grew up in rooms where women disappeared into the word yes. And you grew up in a city that eats the word no with jam and asks for more," he said. "We will survive each other's accents." He lifted his hand. He did not touch my face with it. He touched my wrist, where the wind had kissed cold and Ardan had removed my future in exchange for a different shape of it. His fingers were warm, not burning, not a vow, a present tense. He stepped closer, and I let him. When his mouth touched mine, it was not a claim. It was a sentence of which we had both checked the grammar. He kissed me as if the house had a witness stand, and he intended to be acquitted. I kissed him back, as if the river were watching, and I wanted it to remember me as the woman who did not drown in its narrative. We broke gently, like expensive glass is taught to be lifted. He rested his forehead against mine for a second, then a breath, then a joke of a century. "This will be complicated," he said against my mouth. "I am a librarian," I said. "I like complicated." He smiled and stepped back. The distance did not feel like loss. It felt like design. "We will tell no one," he said. "We will tell Anka," I said, "because she knows already and will punish you for condescension if you pretend otherwise." "Correct," he said, rueful. "We will tell Anke and cook, because she will otherwise think her soup does not work." "And the house?" I said. "Because it can smell lying." "And the river?" he asked, humor dry. "We'll take it bread," I said. That night he slept. Not on the chaise, not on the floor of his too important study, not above the 6th floor with its contagious dreams. In his own bed, with his shoes by the door like a small, deliberate optimism, I did not sleep there. I slept in a room that had never once tried to persuade a woman of anything. It had only held her coat while she decided whether to go. The wind said my name once and called me unfair. I smiled in my sleep and forgave it. Morning. The city sent a bill disguised as gratitude. We paid it with a smile, disguised as a retainer. The engineer returned with the right folder and apologized to me for doubting the existence of the misfiled. I forgave her because she had the dignity to blush. Anke put the brooch in a little glass dish at the window because superstition must sometimes be contained to remember its manners. Cook baked an orange cake with a glaze like truth and a crumb like mercy. She cut it as if saving us was a task achieved one wedge at a time. Ardan visited only once, and not with the bow. The handleless door did not open. The mirror did not drop its silver. I was shelving a stack of books that had been rescued from the small flood when the violin sounded a single note that held. The way a man holds a gaze in a crowded room to embarrass you into admitting who you have come to see. "Thank you," I said, to wood and horsehair and appetite. He did not answer in words. He played the next note. It had the taste of a bridge, finished, walked across, checking itself once over the shoulder to make sure it had not left anything behind. The sound went up into the 6th floor's dreams and came down in the bread, and I did not mind either. The house behaved itself. That is to say, it misbehaved in ways that had become part of its family. A door chose to connect two rooms that had never asked to meet, and then apologized by smelling faintly of lemon peel for a day. A stair creaked with pleasure under the weight of our honesty, and refused to do so for the staff because old wood likes to be exclusive. A window admitted a gull who refused to leave until it had been given a biscuit and its freedom of the library for precisely 3 minutes. It shat precisely once on the corner of my map where the arrow had already been crossed out, and I accepted this as a benediction. Days sorted themselves into patterns. We worked. We did not pretend the house did not own the difference between quiet and silence. He read contracts and let me write the unspoken clauses. I read diaries and let him read me. We avoided the balcony unless we had something kind to say to it. It respected us for the effort. On Thursdays we walked to the bridge and returned with nothing we could name and everything we meant to. I visited my 6th-floor apartment once. The bakery had a new apprentice. The cinnamon hour had moved by 15 minutes, the way lives do when people are born into them. I stood in the middle of the room and listened. It remembered me fondly. It did not want me particularly. I thanked it, which is to say I put my hand on the wall and did not ask it for understanding. I took 3 books, a photograph from the summer my mother's hair had still believed itself an argument with age, and 2 wine glasses. You must drink where you like your weather. On the way back, Cassian met me at the gate, breathless, not from running, but from deciding to. We should talk, he said, and the sentence had the heavy generosity of a person inventing new languages for fairness. We should always talk, I said, but only if you are willing to lose often. Often, he conceded, and we smiled at each other like thieves pretending to be kings. There was an evening when we argued not about a clause or a picture frame or a stare, about mercy. He believed in it for strangers because it made contracts elegant. I believed in it for beloveds because it embarrassed pride, the most expensive habit I own. We raised our voices exactly enough to exercise the furniture. We stepped back exactly before we invented a breach. We agreed to disagree and went to the kitchen and asked cook a question she had not known she wanted to answer. Who taught you to salt flour? As if it were a confession. She told us about a woman who had kissed her on a Tuesday in a pantry next to the place where bread rises and lies do too. We listened as if recipes were the only liturgy that would save anyone. We did not marry. Neither of us had the appetite for a contract the house would attend with opera glasses. We did not live like sinners because the house prefers its sinners flambéed, and we are both too clever to present it with sugar it could set alight. We loved, which is a weather. Some days gust, some days mist. Only once did we call the wind by its name for convenience rather than reverence, and that night the chimneys refused us sleep until we apologized out loud. The river kept its promise, which is the opposite of kindness. It took what it was owed from the city across 3 months, 2 small peers that had abused their ethics, a politician in love with his reflection whom it asked to take a longer bath than decency allowed. It returned to us once the memory of a violin, which is to say, a night when a phrase of music slipped under the handleless door and lay on the floor like a length of silk, too pretty to explain. Muriel left us alone. That is the best the dead can do. Once, in spring, the brooch brightened without sun, and Anke said, "She approves." I did not ask of what. Saints and ancestors require ignorance to keep their teeth sharp. I did not get my week back, because that is not how agreements work. I missed it sometimes, a morning that would have tasted like pears, an afternoon with rain in a bookstore, and me buying a novel because the first line kissed my wrist. In return, I received other minutes I had not paid for. The look on his face the first time he misbuttoned his cuff because his hands were shaking with reasons he refused to name. the scrape of his laugh against my throat, when I told him a story about a librarian who forged a man's middle initial to keep him from being confused with another man who had written only lies. The shape of the house is quiet after a storm, when no one had drowned and nothing had broken and furniture considered forgiveness. On a Tuesday a year later, we stood on the bridge and watched the river consent to be ordinary. A couple fought in stage whisper 20 feet away and made up using words that would not have passed inspection at any of the city's better churches. A boy threw a pebble and looked shocked when it obeyed gravity. I touched the balustrade where the stone was missing, the precise edge that had started this narrative, and I thought of all the discourtesies I have committed under the flag of curiosity. "Are you sorry?" he asked. "For what?" I said. "For wanting to live," he said. "For making you pay. For learning the names of winds and then not always using them to get out of rooms." "No," I said. "You wanted. So did I. We didn't drown. The rest is cataloging. And it." He leaned his hip against the rail and watched me as if I had done something dishonest with his pulse, and he approved. "Stay," he said again. "Reflex and invitation both." "I will," I said, "until I am not curious." "And then?" "Then," I said, and I touched the brooch pinned to the inside of my coat, where it had adopted me without pinching, "I will unhook the moon and hang it above the door so you can find your way back in the dark." He exhaled, amused and chastised, which is the sound men make when you put mercy in a dress and teach it to walk instead of float. We went home, which is the only word the house has learned that never requires a notary. The 6th floor still dreams. The balcony still remembers how to lean. The handleless door has learned to be discreet. The mirror sits in a drawer, face down, because even truth deserves a nap. The baker still breathes his cinnamon breath 3 neighborhoods away. The river moral makes its slow, scandalous loop, gossiping in public about what it does in private with stone. Sometimes, at midnight, I walk the corridor and stand beneath the place where Muriel's portrait used to teach the walls humility. I say her names, all of them, including the middle one. Ardan returned, and I tell her what she would have liked to hear, that the budget balanced, that the staff is content, that the city is, for once, more interested in itself than in us. And then I tell her what she would not have liked to hear and therefore needs, that she was not the only brave person in the room, that bargains can be ended by people other than the ones who began them, that brooches are just metal unless someone decides to wear them as weather. On a night when rain softened the stones without asking for an audience, the violin played again, just once, a line like a river, deciding to be kind. I went to the landing and listened with my palm against the seam. The wind said my name, not as a warning, not as a demand, as a way to practice intimacy without leaving teeth marks. "Good night," I said. "Good," said the house. "Night," said the river. We sleep. We wake. We stand at the edges of things and decline to fall. We kiss in doorways as if thresholds were invented to reward good posture. We write in margins we have earned. We keep a ledger that includes soup and bread boxes and the uncomfortable sovereign weight of a small, stubborn moon. And when the third storm comes again, as it will, as stories teach you they must, we will open the window and let it smell our names. We will offer it cake and manners. We will say the word it likes and ask it to sit. We will ask it, politely and without apology, to witness something it doesn't understand, that the arithmetic of doors is not only about entrances and exits. It is about the spaces in between, where a hand reaches for a wrist and a week leaves a life, and another life arrives, on time for once, with a coat for the rain and a word for the wind, and no hunger for an edge that cannot love it back.